Okay, go.
Welcome to the Modeling Lifestyle, where we celebrate how modelers have embraced their modeling and friendships as a lifestyle. We discuss how modeling can become a life passion and lead to lifelong friendships. The goal of the modeling lifestyle is to preserve the modeling and interests of leading modelers in the modeling industry. The modeling lifestyle is sponsored by NGNC, a market leader in quarter-inch scale modeling with products from over 50 vendors and the largest collection of out-of-stock model paints with over 9,000 bottles available. And now to Jim Kello, MMR and host of the Modeling Lifestyle.
I love the sound of a whistle.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope that you really enjoy our show. I think you will. Our show introduces you to modelers who are not just great model builders, but who people who have made modeling a significant, very significant part of their lives. I want to thank so much all of you for watching us on YouTube. Please don't hesitate to use the chat function and ask any question that you may have along the way. And as soon as it's recognized that you've asked the question, then I'll pass it along to our guest. Tonight, we're really honored to have as our guest, John Burchnall. John is he's just a fantastic modeler, but more than that, he's a major promoter of both the NMRA and model railroading. There's no telling how many people that he has helped and inspired to become better modelers and to improve their modeling and to gain more enjoyment from model railroading through his activities. John, I'm convinced that if there's anything in model railroading that we can do, you've probably done it more than once because your resume is just outstanding. So to start tonight off, I want to welcome John to our show and thank him so much for being here this evening. And John, let me start by asking you a question to tell us a little bit about yourself. Dylan, is there a problem?
Oh, I'm not visible. Sorry. I'm not visible. Am I visible on your screen?
No, that's what I'm waiting to happen.
There we go. There we go. Okay, yes. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Jim, for that introduction. Jim wanted me to share a little background on myself. Well, it's kind of complicated, but it starts a little bit when I was 3.5 years old. And if you could show the first picture there. All right. There we go. There's myself and my brother. My brother's in the background. I'm in the front on the left picture. And I'm at 3.5 years old. He's at 4.5. And this is a typical 4x8 Lionel layout. Our dad surprised us at Christmas with that. And there it is set up in our original home in their dining room. So that was the start of my modeling career, and I've gone nonstop ever since. Unlike a lot of model railroaders, I did not stop for marriage, for dating, for college, for work, for paper routes, for anything. I continued on through until the present day so far. So a lot going on in my hobby world. The picture on the right is more recent. That was about 12 years ago on the Great Wall of China. And it was kind of near towards the end of my career with Procter & Gamble, I served as a research fellow and professional engineer at Procter & Gamble. That's a whole nother story, but it kind of blends to everything else I'm doing. If we could see the next picture. In my teenage years, I worked at Mitchell's Family Store, which at the time was the largest brass locomotive seller in the world. It started out as a 5 and 10 store. Coincidentally enough, it was founded the same year I was born in 1953. So I've got a long history of Mitchell's. This is its last incarnation as it was going out of business several years back now. And there's a similar store that opened up with much of the original display cases. But I built a display layout in there as a teenager in that store It's a long, long story. Met a lot of friends, a lot of railroaders through that. If you could go to the next slide. And then skipping to modern day, we live in Cincinnati, Ohio area. And this is my wife, Ruth Ann, and my son in the background, Mark, and the grandson, Vinny, in the foreground. And he was running the Easter Loggers layout one of the last times we had it at our house before we moved it. We'll talk about that later. But that layout has about a 42-year history in our houses, under 2 houses in Westchester. And we'll talk about that more as well. The next slide, please. And this is Vinny again, enjoying running the Digitrax controller, and you can see he's a bit of a ham there with a smile. But we'll talk about the railroad in a bit later. So basically, I did all that. That's modern day. I also went to school at Virginia Tech and got 2 degrees in civil structural engineering. And in fact, my whole family, it comes from an engineering background. My brother, my sister, my father, my brother-in-law, both our sons. Many of us are double degree engineers. So a lot of engineers in our family, but I also have an artistic strain. My mother was a math major, but she took a lot of art classes. If you slip to the next slide, if there is one, let's see. In this series. Yeah, there we go. This is me working on one of our friends locally here, Brad Jonas's layout on the left, dealing with a new method we developed on making roadbeds for the track, and we'll get into that in a bit. And then this is me on the right, just next to the loggers, one of the last times it was in our basement. Anyway, a lot went on, but I'm a lifelong I don't know what you'd call it, innovator, a clinician, photographer, an author, a builder. I just love all aspects of the hobby. It's really fun, but I'm glad I was able to do it with my family so far, and everything's gone well. And all my friends here online today as well.
Well, this is, to the audience, this is why I started out by saying that, if there's any part of model railroading that you can get involved in, I think John has probably been involved in it, and probably more than once. I mean, his resume, when you look at it, it is phenomenal. And I think you'll see that as we go through tonight. John, there's a lot of hobbies out there: model airplanes, ships, cars, you name it. What drew you to model railroading?
Well, model railroading, it's very hard to articulate, but I think it's the artistic and the technical curiosities and aspects of it. It's also animated because the trains run, so it's not static. It's dynamic. I built all those plastic models. In fact, in 3rd grade, I brought a bunch in for a big fair in our classroom. 3rd grade, aircraft carriers, airplanes. I did model rockets too. Those are animated, sometimes in bad ways, but they're animated. But model railroading encompasses so many aspects, so many really cool things you can deal into. There's history, there's all sorts of stuff, and it's endless. That's why it's called the world's greatest hobby. So that really what drew me to it. I also love math, not surprising from engineering. I love geometry the best. And model railroading, the track planning is all about geometry. It really is. And so that's awesome too for me. But I like figuring things out and making things better. And this hobby is full of opportunities for that. And one of my friends told me recently that I just must have the model railroading gene. So I don't know if there's such a thing, but it sounds good.
Well, I'll buy into that, I guarantee you. Well, what scales have you modeled in, John?
Well, I've been primarily HO, standard gauge, but the Eastern Loggers layout also has narrow gauge on half of it. So 3-foot HO narrow gauge. And I have some experiences, obviously the early experiences with Lionel, O-rail, high rail, O-scale. And I do have some G-scale equipment, actually including a battery-powered locomotive, remote control. And I also have a N-scale rolling stock. And I use those when I teach my classes in Introduction to Model Railroading.
John, we've got a question from a viewer that I want to ask you at this point. He wants you to tell us how you do the stain on your rocks on your layout. Do you use paints or what do you use?
I use diluted acrylic paints of different colors, always water-based. If you get Frary Hayden's book on scenery, and Lou Sassy, who's going to be on the call here shortly, he's got books on scenery, similar methods. Water-based techniques came into vogue probably, 80s maybe, 70s?
Yeah.
70s. And it used to be oil-based stains were before that in the hobby, more Western scenery.
Right.
But it came about. So it's just different washes of acrylics. That's all it is. And then you can hit it with India ink at the end to get the deep, dark cracks showing as black. And then you highlight with a little bit lighter earth gray color on top. And that'll make it pop.
Safe to say that maybe you start out a little bit light in color and then keep adding to it if you want it darker.
Yeah, you keep adding. If you go too far, you have to repaint it with something light and start over, but you can do that too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then getting back to our other questions, as you mentioned, you enjoy all aspects of the hobby of model railroading, but is there one aspect that really sticks out that you really enjoy the most or that's most interesting to you?
Well, that's actually my problem, because I don't think there isn't one aspect, and that's probably why I love the hobby so much. I love a lot of aspects of it. The ones that really stick out to me are the layout design I mentioned. We'll get to that in a second here, Dylan. The layout design, the track planning, which go together. Track laying, scenery, engineering, bridges and structures, research, photography, the rail fanning. I love rail fanning. Mike will talk about that probably. And volunteering. There's almost no aspect of those that I don't enjoy a lot. You can probably flip the question around and say, what areas do I not get involved in? And I can only think of one I really haven't concentrated on much, and that's operations. I've done some, but I haven't really concentrated on it. I've been too busy with everything else. But now this photo here is interesting because this kind of sums up my whole interest in the hobby. You might think it's kind of an odd picture for that, but this is the Cincinnati Union Terminal under construction in the upper left with the steel framework, building the half dome atrium structure at the front. And this is the largest half dome structure in the world and still is today. It was built in the early 30s. And it was one of the last major railroad stations in America built, and it's all Art Deco. You can see the design on the outside and finish. That green area on the bottom left, that normally is cascading waterfalls because there's a giant fountain complex there during the summer. And then inside, the atrium is just gorgeous with all the colors and the murals. It's got mosaic tile murals of the history of technology, the history of mankind, and all that stuff along there. It's really very fascinating. And inside are three or four museums that are just fascinating, including the world's largest S-scale layout is in the Historical Society Museum to the left. So this kind of epitomizes to me my whole interest. It's the research, it's the structural engineering, it's the art, it's the just everything. I mean, it really does. And photography, of course. Architecture. I almost went into architecture, but it wasn't enough math, so I went into engineering.
Well, I'll tell you, the way that you talk about model railroading, there's no question about it, why you've been so instrumental in helping other people enjoy the hobby and get involved in it, because you're a great salesman for our hobby. You know, a lot of us have heard of you maybe, and people have talked about your modeling, but we've never seen any photos of anything that you've built. So maybe we can take just a few minutes before we introduce your friends to see a couple of the photos of some of your models and have you talk to us about them a little bit.
Sure. Well, we'll have some pictures here of the Easter Loggers layout. This is a group of us that started in December of 1980, believe it or not. And we started to build, our goal was to build a layout that was cohesive in theme. Somebody's phone's ringing. Cohesive in theme, and that you could bring, it's portable, you could bring it to shows and show the public what you could do if you made a layout with the same theme all the way around, look like the real thing and be a scale model railroad, not a toy train. And so we picked the theme of Pennsylvania logging. We'll get into that a little bit later. But this 1920s Pennsylvania logging, you see here the sawmill complex on the top, and auxiliary industries, wood products industries. The whole layout is filled with wood products industries. That's all it is. All the structures are almost all handmade, scratch built. The track's all hand laid. The scenery's all handmade. I mean, just go on and on and on. But it was a wonderful layout.
Okay.
And next slide, there's another one, I believe. There we go. These are just some of the other sides of the layout. It's 10 by 20 feet. And it is portable, believe it or not. You can see it doesn't look portable, but it is portable. And in fact, it's uniquely portable, and we'll talk about some of that later, but there's very few bolts in this layout. It's all gravity, almost all gravity. We got angled dowel, wood dowels, and all sorts of things that hold it all together. It's just amazing.
But it is modular, right?
It's sectional, not modular. And
Okay.
modules go together different ways. You know, sections only go together one way.
I got you. Okay.
So it's sectional, but they're 2.5 by 5 foot sections nominally. There's one that's 3 by 5
Gotcha.
on the end.
Absolutely beautiful. Just gorgeous. Next one, Dylan.
That's for the slides on that.
Well, I just don't see any more pictures then for right now, but I do want to introduce and have them join us, some of your friends that are with us this evening, to maybe give us a better or fuller picture of who John Buchner is. So let me introduce 3 of your friends that are with us. First one being Mike Tenner. Mike, welcome. Glad you're here this evening, and wonder if you could share with us a little bit about your background and how you met John and got to know him.
Well, my background as far as modeling is, well, I started as a child too. My dad and mom bought me an S-scale American Flyer layout, and I was hooked at that point. But I met John in 1980. We've been friends for 40 some years now, and we enjoy the hobby in just about all aspects. You'll see some pictures of John and I rail fanning and model building. I was not one of the original members of the Eastern Loggers. I came a year later, but I met John in 1980 at a show at the Great Oaks School here in Sharonville, and he had a pad there that was requesting for people to sign up if they wanted to learn how to be involved in model railroading. Well, I signed up, and we've been at this just about ever since.
That's great. That is great. Well, let me
There are the slides, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mike?
Did you want me to? Okay, that's John and another friend of ours. That's John Shields there on the left. But John and I were usually in the fall, we'll take a trip over to the Pennsylvania area. And this is on the porch at a favorite rail fan spot called the Station Inn. I'm sure a lot of your viewers are going to be familiar with that. That's in Crescent, PA. And the train you see there is the apex of the run for Norfolk Southern's run from Pittsburgh to, I believe it's Harrisburg, John?
Right.
And anyway, that's right at the peak. And the Station Inn there used to be a place where the crew change would happen. And behind that train, there's some rail facilities, locomotive facilities, but this is a real hot spot for rail fans. It's called the Station Inn. John and I have stayed there several times. We've even stayed there with our wives. And so hopefully we'll get to do that again pretty soon.
Next photo.
Okay, that is John and I are rail fanning. That's in Kentucky, down by Maysville, Kentucky. And interesting thing about that picture, as we were leaving there, I found some foam rubber, little sheets of foam rubber. And what really transpired was we developed an entire way of laying track based on foam rubber, which you'll see here in a little bit. But that photograph right there is just John and I along Route 8. And that day is when I found the foam rubber that we developed a way of laying track.
Okay.
And that's, again, a rail fan trip. That's John's wife, Ruth Ann, in the background. And we're standing on a rickety bridge. And I think that's on the Rat Hole line down in Kentucky.
Yeah, Norfolk Southern.
Norfolk Southern, yeah.
Used to be Southern.
Yeah.
Well, those are some great pictures, and I'm sure that there's a lot of memories connected with those, Mike, for both you and for John.
Oh, yeah.
So let me move on to another guest here, Lou Sassy. Lou, welcome. I appreciate your appearance with us this evening. And if you could share with us a little bit of your background and how you met John.
Well, thank you, Jim, for having me here. And I'm happy to be here to support my good friend, John. I won't get into my background way back to my childhood, but right now I'm a contributing editor for Model Railroader magazine. And Cheryl and I, my wife Cheryl and I, have photographed model railroads all over the country and Canada for over 40 years. I've also wrote a number of 5 how-to books, and I've had over 100 articles and book segments published by Kalmbach and other publications, model railroad publications. My personal layout is of the Sandy River Rangeley Lakes in Owen 30. I first met John and Ruth Ann while we were shooting the Eastern Loggers Railroad layout in the mid-1990s. We became good friends with both of them, and he is now my #1, and I mean #1 layout scout. And what you see here, that's Cheryl and I up in Indiana, shooting one of the smaller layouts we've ever shot. And John had found this for us. I don't know, I can't tell the other individuals. They think the owner is actually holding the backdrop in this case. That's me sitting in the chair, semi-relaxing as we do video of that layout.
That's a Z scale layout, I believe.
Yeah, I think it was Z. Next picture. And here we are again. We're in the same room shooting some more. Now we're shooting stills with one of the digital cameras. Cheryl's holding up the backdrop. You hold the backdrop up to increase the impact the scenery. And we're shooting this one. We did this a few years ago, John, I imagine, right? You might remember.
That was quite a few years, I think a decade ago, in fact.
Yeah. Next picture. And besides going around and shooting model railroads, as I said, we've become very good friends with John and Ruth Ann. And here, I believe we're in at the Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. I think we did a little traveling together, and we got this photo opportunity while we were at the museum. So we got someone to take our picture there. Next one. And here again, we're in Lebanon, having our favorite lunch spot. We're hitting the lunch spot. What is it? The Golden Lamb in Lebanon?
The Golden Lamb, Lebanon, Ohio.
At our table.
It's just north of Cincinnati a ways.
Yeah, I think that says Burchnall table on it, because every time we go to that table. But that says enjoying lunch there. And next picture. And here we're in Washington. Is it Washington, D.C.? I believe. I think that fellow in the background. Yeah, that's him. That's Abe. He's watching over us as we get that picture taken. Next.
I think that's it.
I think that might be it.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. And I'm sure you've got 1,000 memories of your time with John too, Lou. But thank you so much for sharing some of it with us.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
And the next friend I'd like to introduce is Chuck Dreola, who is also the NMRA superintendent of the division that John belongs to down in Cincinnati. So Chuck, welcome. I'm so happy you're here with us this evening. Can you share a little bit of information about yourself and how you met John? I think you're muted, Chuck.
Chuck, unmute. Bottom left, Chuck. Bottom left. Hit the mute button. There you go.
Well, as Lou stated, I would like to reiterate that I'm pleased to be here to support my friend and a wonderful gentleman. As far as my history in model railroading, it didn't start until I was in my early mid-20s. Up to that time, I had been building model cars. And I met a gentleman who showed me his layout, and I was enraptured because you can show off your handiwork. Like John said, it becomes animated and it tells a story, where a static model just sits there, no matter how well you detail it. So I really got into that. My favorite parts are scenery and structures. And in these scenes, let's see, the one on the left there, that's a switchback area. I started many years ago when I was still living in Cleveland. It's been transported many times. And the shot on the right is something more recent on my layout. And like I said, I'm sorry, the picture on the top left, all that scenery, all that rock work was either with plaster forms, molds, or hand carved. And on the bottom right, that is all pink foam, extruded styrofoam, which I moved to exclusively for doing my my scenery and rock work. I model Colorado, turn of the 20th century. And I don't think I have any pictures of me and John because
Actually, you do on the next slide after this one.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, but first of all, talk about your rock technique here. That's your rock technique.
Yeah, I do a little gouging and carving with different tools, but what I really like to do is break off pieces of it in different shapes, and I hot glue them onto a styrofoam base. And it's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle. But what I like about it is over plaster is it's not as messy. And if you don't like it, it's not as difficult to rip out and start over. The only difference is in coloring. With plaster, you would use a very thin acrylic wash. With this, it has to be more opaque, put a base coat on and then go back over it with acrylics in a wet on wet technique to blend them in. And I can create just about any kind of rock, from shale to igneous to metamorphic, different parts of the country. It really isn't that difficult once you use some photos as guides.
Beautiful work.
There's something down there in the center. If you back up the slide, if you can back it up. Down in the center of that lower photo, you'll see some basalt, which is easy to create with styrofoam, but much more difficult if you're kind of carve it out of plaster. Okay, go ahead, move on.
All right.
Like I said, there aren't too many pictures of me and John because he wants no tangible record that he knows me.
Actually, you're in the bottom left picture. You and I are both in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's one of the very few.
That's one of those recognition certificates for our convention we ran at regional in 2018. So some of the volunteers and leaders.
Two of the Eastern loggers there, John.
Pardon?
There's two of the other Eastern loggers there. That's
Yeah,
Marina.
yeah. They're also Brad Jonas and his wife are in that picture as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In the top left photo, there are two co-chairmen of our national convention that we ran in, what was that?
05.
05, right. Charlie Atkinson and John.
And the 03 regional we did together as well.
Yeah.
And then the bottom right photo, you may not know that, but that was this year. That's when I received my 50-year membership award from Frank Koch, who's the CFO of NMRA. And he's also our member. He's a treasurer of the NMRA.
Well, I figured if he's good enough for the national, he's good enough for us.
Yeah, and the big picture in the upper right, that's our big fall show. That's just a small portion of our big fall show. Very small portion. But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, that's the oldest continuous model railroad show in the country, I believe.
We think it is. It's 54 years now.
Yeah.
Well, I know that all three of you have probably got thousands of stories that you can tell about your experiences and trips that you've taken with John and his family. But I'm wondering if maybe you could share one with us that sticks in your mind, or maybe a comment on one of John's models or one of the techniques that he's developed. Mike, how about you? You have one that you could share with us?
Oh, I have several. Yeah, John has been instrumental in developing a lot of different things with our Eastern Loggers modular layout. And one of those, I think he's going to talk about here a little bit, but the one that just really impresses me the most is this idea of stopping blocks. When I started modeling, I was not really into the electrical part of it, but my background is actually electronics and computers. But as far as how that relates to trains, if it wasn't for John, I probably wouldn't know much. But he developed this whole idea of stopping blocks, and I'm just going to stop right there because I know he's going to explain that a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's he's got, well, there's quite a few things that I could talk about as far as John and you know, so.
Well, I thank you so much. Lou, how about you? You got something that you can share with us?
Yes, I do, Jim. Well, it relates, first of all, to photography, because that's how I met John. And again, regarding my #1 scout status. After photographing the Eastern Loggers, John set out to find more layouts in and around Cincinnati, and actually throughout Ohio and quite a few other states, the Union, actually. He's been very, very, very helpful in that regard. Also, regarding his modeling, some things I can remember is that I can say about him is he's very innovative. And a few of the things I can think of is that he's developed the use of laminated styrofoam construction with regards to the Eastern Loggers. He's developed a way to repair Bachmann Shays. They're well known as their mechanisms fail without very, very, just about every case. And he's developed a way to repair them. And he has gotten a lot of Bachmann Shays running again, thanks to his knowledge and his expertise. He's also introduced me a few years ago to the use of sheet PVC. Again, it was on the Eastern Loggers, and he was using it for scenic dividers and balances. And it's very, very innovative way to use that material in both those regards. And I'm sure Mike can go on. Just like Mike, Mike was involved in this Bachmann Shay business, I believe.
Yeah,
but he's very innovative. He's quite a character, and I'm happy to know him.
Well, thank you so much for your input, Lou. Chuck, how about you? You have something that you can share that's possible?
Well, as far as modeling goes, Lou stole a little bit of my thunder. My experience with John was to repair my Bachmann Shay, like so many of them. And I went over his place, and Mike joined us, and I was just amazed that there wasn't anything about that locomotive they didn't know. They manufactured their own replacement parts, not out of plastic, but out of metal. And their conversion to repair it will last, and it runs great. And I thank them both for that. A little later, I'll talk about how knowing John has been such an impact on me in this hobby and in the NMRA.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks all three of you so much for sharing some of your stories about your relationship with John. We really do appreciate it. But John, let me change the subject a little bit here. I know that you are a strong supporter of the NMRA. You're a life member going way, way back. As you said, you've been a member now for over 50 years. And you're very, very active in the organization. Frankly, why is the NMRA so important to you?
Well, I think it's important for a few reasons. It's a little hard to articulate, but I was exposed to the NMRA when I was young. I'll talk a little later, but there were like at least three local modelers, four maybe, that really took me under their wing and coached me and included me. We had a regional convention in Wilmington, Delaware, where I was born and raised once, and I didn't register. I was a teenager. I'm not even sure. Yeah, I think I was a young teenager. And they invited me to come to the banquet speaker meeting free. Just come in the door and sit with them. I didn't participate in the dinner, but after the dinner, I came by and I sat and I listened to the banquet speaker. They invited me to do that to their table. And that's just the kind of things that happen. So I was exposed to them. Of course, I read all about NMRA in the hobby magazines, Model Railroader and Craftsman and all those. And I knew about them. I looked up some of their technical data. When I joined in 71, you got a big packet with all their recommended practices and data sheets. And I poured through all those because I was fascinated about all the knowledge they had obtained there, and they were sharing with everybody. Of course, the NMRA is really important because they set the standards in the industry for us to be able to have our scale hobby and not have too many problems with interactions between suppliers and vendors and manufacturers. So I think they've done a great job. And but the bottom line to me, though, is the NMRA is more than all that. It's the umbrella organization for the whole hobby. It's the one organization that really encompasses everything in the hobby. And there's lots of different factions in the hobby and all that. And I understand all those, and those are cool. But it's nice to have an umbrella organization that covers everything. And I think that's why I support NMRA, because I believe strongly that's the case.
Well, the NMRA has one thing that I treasure that I've gotten from the NMRA, and I'm sure some of you may know what I'm talking about. It's amazing to me that a lot of current people in the NMRA kind of look at me and their eyes glaze over when I mention this, but I use it all the time, and I refer to it as the old big blue book. Do you remember that loose leaf binder, the big old thing that had every kind of piece of information you ever needed in the world about model railroading, all contained in that big blue book?
Well, now it's electronic on the web, on the internet. When you're a member, you go to the member only pages and you can get all of that stuff. And I've downloaded quite a bit for some of my clinics and some other uses lately. So
absolutely. But as far as I'm concerned, that is one of my real treasures. I use that big blue book all the time, and I never will forget it. I think it's one of the greatest assets the NMRA has ever produced. But moving on from that, you're also very active, though, locally. And you give clinics and so forth. You're a great volunteer. What has this all meant to you? I mean, because you spend an awful lot of time volunteering and participating and helping others.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I do volunteer a lot. Chuck will probably talk about that later, but yeah, I do. And it's a detriment of building my new railroad a little bit, but that's okay. I mean, I believe volunteering is really big. It is another reason to join the NMRA, to join any organization for that matter, but especially NMRA if you're into trains, because when you volunteer, it's really a win-win-win situation. It's a win for the person you're helping or the group you're helping. It's a win for you because you'll learn stuff and you'll learn leadership skills. And you'll see here, we'll talk about that convention in a second. And then it's also a win for the whole hobby because everybody benefits from the contributions involved in everything. So this is an example. This is the Cincinnati Express Convention, our last regional we ran in 2018. You saw from an earlier slide, but a little bit of this. But you'll see we had a little flyer that I prepared to left and right, and the middle two slides are real interesting. The one, the Entertainment Junction, and the Bob Lawson one. These are layout collage slides that I created, and I created these for virtually every scenic layout in Cincinnati, in which we have a lot. So in my database, I have 150 layouts in Cincinnati alone, of which probably, well, it says here in the upper left, 67 layouts were open on that convention, 35 were published, 10 of them in Great Model Railroads. So we have a lot of published layouts and a lot of photogenic layouts. It was one reason Lou had so many layouts to shoot here. So basically, I made a collage for each one of these, and most of those photos are ones I took. And then I created collages, and I put this on our website. So, and then to promote the layouts and the owners, but also to promote our conventions. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. It's a lot of work, but it was fun. So we have these for everybody. That's just an example. I told you I was befriended by people in the past, and I think that maybe that's what made me feel like I need to help people too. I believe that if you have some knowledge to share or some skill to share that'll help a situation or help a person, you ought to share it. I mean, that's what it is. Mike and I go around helping local modelers fix their railroads. And we don't do it in any official capacity. We just do it when I find a need, and we go out and I say, hey, Mike, you want to do this? And we go out and do it. And a lot of times we learn something doing that. So
that's so admirable. I really do. And it's something that frankly bothers me, because if people that have the knowledge don't do some mentoring and don't try to pass it on to modelers who need the help, then we're going to lose that great knowledge of the model railroad that makes the hobby as great as it is today. And that really concerns me. So you ought to be commended for what you and Mike and the others are doing in that regard. Well,
not only that, but it's fun. Like I said, if you flip to the next slide, you'll see something else. This is when we ran that national convention in 2005, we discovered that all our volunteers didn't get to see all the cool attractions that we held for all the people coming from all over the world. So we decided, well, why don't we run bus trips every year and show some of these attractions to our own people? So we started an annual bus trip. So I did this with another member, Merlin Jarman, in our group. And we ended up doing it for 10 years in a row. 10 years in a row. And we went all over the place and had a great time. You'll see the Age of Steam complex. A lot of people know about that. It's in the middle of Ohio. There's a lot of cool things. So that was just one aspect. So that's just one of the things that morphed from doing that and morphed into that. That's a lot of work to do these, but it's fun when we pull them off well, and we do. And but I'm also the webmaster here. I took that on because nobody wanted to do it. I didn't know anything about webmaster, and I learned how to do it. And I've been doing it over 10 years. I'm the past superintendent like Chuck, and assistant superintendent like Chuck was, and past fall show chair that we mentioned earlier, that fall show. I do a lot of this virtual meetings. I started up doing all those, and we do simulcast now in our division. And I started all that with Chuck. He did the audio. I did most of the other stuff. And I've also been a recipient of the Russ Wenderfer Award for the Mid-Central region, which is an annual award given out to one person in the entire region for hobby promotion that promoted the hobby. So, I mean, it goes on and on and on. But a lot of stuff I've done, but I believe it's worthwhile because it helps a lot of people.
Well, it's obvious that you enjoy it quite a bit. So with all your background and with all of the knowledge of the organization and at both the local and national level, John, what should the NMRA be doing to further promote and encourage more people to join the organization and get involved?
Well, I think it's a difficult question, but I think it's also fairly simple in the answer. The simple answer is it requires local people to engage people locally. So local marketing, local events, like we do. We have monthly meetings in our division. Some divisions, they stop in the summer and they stop at Christmas. We don't stop for any month. We continue every month. In our meetings, we have often world-class layouts, the ones that Lou has photographed, open after our meetings. And usually two of them after our meetings. I talked to one new guy that just joined this year. He said he joined just so he could see those layouts at the end of the meetings. So that's an example. You've got to have things for people to do and see. We have 2 shows a year. One's a flea market, one's our giant show. We have other special events. Chuck just started a picnic, an annual picnic this year. It was his idea. He started it and we pulled it off. It was really good. We had a train trivia contest with it too. It was cool. So basically, we've got to do local things with local people. People have to step up and conduct things. I mean, if we sit in our armchairs and think about it, we won't get anything done. So you got to get out there and offer things for the people and engage people. I think one of the other things that the NMRA, beyond all that, one of the other things NMRA needs to stress more of, and I don't think they do a good job of stressing this yet, so we need to work on this, Chuck, but we need to emphasize the creative and critical thinking parts of the hobby.
Yeah.
This hobby isn't just playing with trains. It's like Mike and I do. We go around and debug layouts, figure out things, fix things. I mean, and that is fun to troubleshoot things and figure out a better approach and figure out a way to fix them. That's fun. The creative parts with like Chuck does with the rock work, he does amazing rocks with just breaking off pieces of styrofoam. I mean, how simple can that be if you learn the technique he teaches you? It's not that bad. So anyway, the critical thinking and the creative parts, I would think teachers in schools would love this hobby because of those aspects.
Well, I think that needs to be communicated because I don't see it, at least to my knowledge, I just don't see it out there happening like that. But I think it's a great idea. When Lou and I were talking in an earlier show, Lou also brought up the creativity aspects of the hobby and how important he felt that was. So, you know, it seems that really the talented modelers, like all 4 of you all are, you know, you have the same view of our hobby. It's not just it's not just watching trains run on track, but it's much more creative. It's much more dynamic than that. And communicating that, I think, is something that's really important. But in addition to all of this, John, here you are, you demonstrate your modeling techniques and the skills, both in your magazine articles that you've written, the clinics that you've given around the country. Can you share some of those activities with us? Because I think those are critically important too.
Sure. I think the first slide will show the articles, some of the articles that I've been either the author or co-author of. The top 3 here are the first 3 articles on the Eastern Loggers Railroad. Lou photographed the Great Model Railroads one in the middle top. And there's a 4th one in the can that Lou has already submitted that we photographed on the Eastern Loggers that should show up in another year or 2 in either Great Model Railroads or Model Railroader. So that's 4 articles that I've co-authored. Interestingly enough, I co-authored them all with different people in the Eastern Loggers. So the first one was with Jerry Strangarity, our co-founder, really the founder with me. The second one was with David Keith. The third one was with Paul Miklos because he built some of the structures that were highlighted in it. And the 4th one was with Mike Teener here on the call. So, and you'll see that hopefully in another year or 2. So that's an example of those articles in the loggers. Down below, we had a cover shot that I did for the Bulletin, NMRA Bulletin, before it was called Scale Rails, or NMRA Magazine now, actually it's called. And then Lou suggested I submit some photos in the Walters catalog. They're always looking for good photos. And so Lou and I both photographed some scenes on the loggers. He submitted his and I submitted mine, and we both got them published. And then the Gazette, we had a narrow gauge convention in Cincinnati, and I did some supporting photos of some of the layouts, including the Easter loggers in there. There was other things, Model Railroad Planning Magazine at Tony Custer edits. I had a snippet in there of a new idea and his recent issue of that. And next year's issue of that coming out in January, I believe, I'll have a full article with a modeler up in Dayton, Ohio, just north of here, David Hall, on a very interesting aspect of his layout that I did the photographs and co-wrote the article with him. So it's a lot of cool stuff. Those are the publications. Then there are clinics. The next slide, if you go to that, you'll see there's a series of clinics I've done. The first clinic I ever did for model railroading, these are presentations for those that don't know what a clinic is, that you do at meetings with fellow model railroaders, basically, and at conventions. And this one was on foam board layout construction. This one, Lou mentioned a little of this earlier, but this was really, what's interesting about this clinic is the method I was playing with before we formed the Easter Loggers group, like a year or two before. So this is in the late 70s. And I was working on making a domino-like modular sections with high-low tracks on them, on all the interfaces, and they could put them together in different ways, like dominoes almost. And I was doing this long before David Barrow in Texas talked about dominoes, but I was going to do that. And what happened is the Eastern Loggers formed. We decided to adopt the foam board method, but we picked a different dimension of the section. So I've used it as a demonstration module ever since. But here's Mike Tiener laying a track. You get an idea of the different layers. These are horizontal layers of 2-inch thick white foam board glued together. And then we carve down trenches for the track roadbed. And that's the secret to it. But there's a lot more to that. This clinic is always popular when I present it. Always opened up eyes. And I've never really made an article on this. The best I did was a sidebar in that Great Model Railroads article that Lou photographed. So if you can flip to another one, that one's very popular. Flip to the next one. You'll see making trees. This one, I always had clinics of making trees, and then fairly recently, about a year ago or something, maybe half a year ago, I teamed up with Cheryl Sassy, Lou's wife Cheryl, and Cheryl makes these exquisite precision trees that are just incredible. And I tend to make more of the quick trees you can make, because the Easter Loggers layout needed a lot of trees. So out of weeds and things. So I teamed up and I did the deciduous weed quick trees, and she did the really fancy trees. What happened there? Did I hit something? Okay. And the next slide, if you will. Okay. Something happened here. There we go. Okay. And then this one is, I mentioned the introduction to model railroading 101, if you will. This is that clinic. I put this together for non-model railroad groups. They want to know more about the hobby, and it was kind of fun putting it together. There's some facts in that. I've done this for church groups and other groups. You won't believe it where I've done this, but I did it at a continuing ed college here in the suburbs of Cincinnati, for people that take free classes and when they want to see stuff. So I did it there. Mike helped me on that. You flip the next one. This is the engineering secrets of Easter Loggers. This is alluded to, some of what Lou alluded to and Mike was alluding to. There are some cool secrets about that. We'll get into some of those in a bit, but I put together a whole clinic on that. And I presented this quite a few places, quite a few divisions and conventions. And it's always interesting to see people's reaction to some of the things we've come up with on the layout. I can tell you, the building the Easter Loggers layout, it's not as easy as you'd think to build a portable layout. When you build a portable layout, the whole game changes. There are many things you have to do different. And we had to engineer all of them from scratch because there was no guidebook for any of this. So we figured them all out. Anyway, that's part of that clinic. If you go to the next one. And then this is one I did. This is also popular with couples and civic groups. My wife and I went on the Rocky Mountaineer and then on the Canadian all the way across Canada fairly in recent years, pre-COVID. And we had already been on Amtrak out west on several routes. And so people kept asking questions about how do you do this? So what do you do this? What's it like? What's it cost? All this stuff. What are the cars like? So I put a clinic together to explain the differences between the three approaches and compared them. And it was quite eye-opening for people to see that. It was a lot of fun. And the next one I think is one more maybe. Yeah. Oh, this one's my most recent clinic, and it's also the most work and the most detail, but it's probably the most usefulness for the hobby for long term, I would think. But basically, I got tired of not remembering what dates different things happened in the hobby and the real world and trains. Like, when did certain types of brake systems get outlawed? You know, when did roof walks get outlawed? When did the cabooses all change? What types of cabooses there were? But more importantly, which engines were made when? Not only the steam engines, but the diesel engines and the electric engines. And then I expanded it into other things you'd have on your layout, like highway signs and traffic lines on the highways. When did those change from yellow to white and dotted to not dotted and all that? You can see there's a lot of different changes over time. And when you're a model railroader, if you're trying to scale model railroading, you're trying to model the real world at a certain period of time normally, and you don't want to have things out of place. So, but you don't know what should be in place and what should be out of place unless you know all these dates. And there's no way anybody can remember any of this. So during COVID, I decided I'd had enough, and I'm going to research every one of these and document them on timelines. And so that's what I did. And it's more massive than what you see here. And it's really 2 clinics. It's so big, and it really should be 3 clinics. So this one I did at the St. Louis RPM meet, a Railroad Prototype Modelers meet. And they invited me because they saw me at Indianapolis at the Tri-Regional meet in Indianapolis. And so anyway, it's a lot of fun. This one is very popular, I'm sure.
Oh, I bet it is. Well, listen, we've got a question from a viewer, and it's my fault because I didn't see it earlier. But one of you mentioned a wet on wet technique. And the viewer is asking, what is that?
That is when you are painting with the acrylics is you don't let one color dry before you put another one next to it, or you'll start looking like a camouflage uniform.
Okay.
While it is still wet and you want to bring in another color, you blend it on the edges or even in the middle, and then spread it out with your brush. And it makes a much more gradual change to that color. With rocks, it looks very natural, not like you want to stay away from a zebra look for the most part. There are instances when you do want that for a certain location, but I found that it really looks much better if you keep that the paint a little wet while you're adding some different colors to your rocks.
So it blends better. We have wet on wet, the 2 colors blend.
Right.
Okay, thank you so very much. Well, John, of all of these different kind of clinics and things that you've dealt with around the country, which one's your real favorite? Which one did you really enjoy?
Well, you can probably tell from what I was describing on some of those, and that's only about half the clinics I really have, but there's really not one favorite, but I'd have to say there's 3. But the foam board layout construction is definitely extremely popular clinic every time I do it. I haven't done it in a number of years. I probably should do it again. I should probably write a full featured article on it, which I never did. But I've got another idea on that later I'll talk about. And then the engineering secrets of the Eastern Loggers has always been popular. That's pretty favorite to me because it's got a lot of the cool techniques that Mike was talking about and Lou was talking about. And then the Timelines Clinic now is popular, and I've already got ideas to extend that into other topics on the same thing. So I could make it into 3 clinics maybe. The problem I'm going to have is publishing that, as I don't know how to publish it in a book form because I'm using heralds from all over the internet. I don't know how I do the credits and the trademarks on those, but I do have that on our internet site. It is published on a website. And so anybody can see that anytime they want for free and go.
What is your website, John?
Go to the Cincinnati Division 7 website. I'm the webmaster and I don't even remember the URL. I don't care. I just Google on Cincinnati Division 7 or Cincinnati NMRA, or you could go through the NMRA.org, Master National Organization's website and peel down into the regions and the divisions and go to our division website that way. We're Cincinnati Division 7 of the Mid-Central region. So just go there and then you go to the Modeler's Aid tab. There's a bunch of tabs like a signal tower and a bunch of tabs. Modeler's Aid tab, go to that, scroll down in that tab and you'll find about 100 clinics and 2 of them near the top are these timelines. You also see the phone board in there and most of my other clinics.
Okay, got it. Well, I know that you're awfully close with Lou Sassy. And I know that you have found many model railroads for him to photograph and publish in Model Railroader magazine. How on earth did you get involved with that?
Well, it all started with another famous model railroader. That's Alan Keller. Alan Keller, you see some of the slides here. This is some of our work sessions together. You see me working with him because I've attended most of the photo shoots that I found for Lou. And that Bob Lawson I was telling you about earlier is in the middle photo with Lou and Cheryl. That's Bob Lawson. You saw the little collage of his layout earlier. Anyway,
I hear that you've done so many. You've probably done what, a third of all of the ones?
I've done about a third. I found about a third of the layouts that Lou's photographed, we believe. I don't think Lou has an exact count of how many he's actually photographed, but yeah. I have an exact count of the ones I've worked with him on. And I know when they were and the dates and everything else. But there were 72 we've done. About 2/3 of those are probably in the greater Cincinnati area and nearby towns, and then the rest were in other states, like Lou said. But what happened is Alan Keller was scouting layouts to do his video production. He does video layout productions. He used to. He doesn't anymore. But he used to do professional productions of videos of layouts and sell the DVDs and the VHS tapes. And so he came by on a scouting visit to Cincinnati, came to my layout, came to my house, and came to look at the Eastern Loggers layout as a possible candidate. Well, he didn't bite on a candidate for a video. At the time, the layout wasn't that far along, actually. And but he did call his good buddy Lou and recommended to Lou that he do a still shoot for Model Railroader because he thought it was good enough for a still shoot. And so that's when I just got a phone call from Lou, I think, after that. And then I first met Lou when he came to our house. And I can't remember if Cheryl was with him or not then. I really can't remember. But it was 1994. And our article, that Great Model Railroads one you saw earlier, was published in the 98 edition of Great Model Railroads. But it takes that long sometimes, usually 2, 3, 4 years. And so that's when I started with Lou. But I was also heavily involved in our local division. And I knew we had lots of other publication quality layouts in Cincinnati, but we didn't have a way to get them photographed and published. Nobody jumped up to want to do that in our division. Nobody had those skills developed to do it or the time to do it. But here's Lou, a professional photographer and modeler that is now connected to us. So I jumped on that and I said, well, Lou, I've got some others. You want to see him? Initially, Lou scouted him. He went on trips with me to scout him and then sent the slides to Kalmbach, got them pre-approved, and then he came back later to shoot them. And then later on, I've been taking the scouting photos myself, sending them to Lou, and then he sends them on to Kalmbach. So that's the way it's been going for ever since then, 1998. And so I don't know how many years that is now, but it's a lot. So that's what, 24 years. Yeah.
28, it's 28 years.
24 from 98, 28 from in
Oh,
94.
you got to count.
Depends on how you
those
count
couple
when I
years.
start scouting, but yeah.
You started scouting.
Oh, you're right. I was started scouting right away. He did other shoots before they got published even. You're right. So
Right.
you're right, 28. So 72 layouts and we're still going, and then we still got more going. And then when I go to conventions and stuff, there's layout tours. So I'll photograph them. And if I find some that are good, I'll tell them I'll send them to Lou. And if you're interested in having them published, and we'll see if we can get it published. And so that's how, and Lou writes many of the stories, if you've seen in the magazines, and he writes really well, and he's really efficient at writing. And sometimes the owners write them, but that's fine, but he still does the shooting. But to my opinion, why do I do this? My primary motivation is to enable the world to see the great modeling of these layouts. I mean, it'd be a shame to not have them available to see by the world. So that's why I do it. I can tell you every once in a while, I run into a layout owner that could care less. They could care less. I said, look, this isn't just for you. I mean, I understand some people could care less about getting the notoriety. I understand that. But I said, but don't deprive the rest of the world from seeing your work. Your work deserves to be published. And I finally got through to one local modeler here that Lou photographed before they moved out of their house. And this guy was real adamant about not having it published. He wanted to keep it secret. And I said, look, you don't publish your address or your name or anything. I mean, you do put your name if you want it. You could have a pseudonym if you want that. But usually they have their name, but you don't give them the address or phone numbers or contact information. So nobody's going to come steal it or rob it or anything. So anyway, everybody's particular, but I just love it. And you should see the smiles on some of the owners' faces when they get it all done. And Lou shows up, Lou and Cheryl show up to photograph it, and they are all smiles. And then when they get it published, they're really happy usually. So
Absolutely. It just sounds amazing to me. I think you're fortunate to have kind of fallen in with Lou to be able to do this.
Oh yeah, it was a golden opportunity for both of us, I think.
Well, listen, you've developed several innovations because Mike and Chuck have both mentioned them, and so did Lou. For our hobby, the foam board layout construction, the stopping blocks, the easy mat road beds, the rebuilding of the Shay drives, the use of the PVC material. My gosh, you've gotten all of these developments. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, you sound like quite the inventor.
Sure. Well, it's fine. Well, I didn't mention earlier, but I have 12. I'm a inventor on 12 patents from Procter & Gamble as well. But that's not model railroad related. So I guess you can say there's inventions in my blood a little bit, but that's part of being an engineer too and being inquisitive about things. But anyway, the first slide, I'll show you one of them here, and we'll see a few slides of these. This is the foam board. We talked about that a little bit already. There's a lot more to it. I encourage you to go to that website and look up the whole thing. There's actually two sets of slides. One is all the photos, and the other one is a written description step by step of everything. So I encourage you to download both of those. But this technique, we adopted it, and it works great. And I tell you, I plan on using this method forever. There's some other people that have adopted parts of it, but not all of it. But I can tell you, once you understand it, the whole technique is you carve down for the road beds rather than building up with wood. But you notice there's hardly any wood. There's just a bottom grid. And that bottom grid doesn't have to be 1x4s like we had in the loggers. That was overkill. If I had to do it again today, it'd be 1x2s. You really just need some simple little grid to hide the wiring underneath, basically. You don't need it for strength. The secret is 2 layers of 2-inch foam glued together first before you carve anything. So you have at least 4 inches of structural foam, but you also get the depth underneath the track that way for bridges, which a lot of people don't model correctly. This is the problem with a lot of model railroads is they're like plywood centrals. They don't have any below the track scenery. You got to have, in the real world, there's almost as much below the track scenery as there is above the track scenery. So you got to plan for having depth below the track. That's one of the secrets of model railroading. Anyway, that's that method. Flip on to the next one. I think, I can't remember what the next one is. Yeah. Oh, this is the easy mat. This is that synthetic roadbed technique we came up with. And actually, and this was spurred a little bit by Mike's finding that piece of hard rubber. It was actually kind of a hard rubber that Mike found. He never did figure out what that was used for, Mike. It might have been the padding under concrete tie brackets.
I don't know. They were like 4x8 squares, and they were about, I don't know,
Yeah.
a little more than a 16th inch thick, and it was just looked like ground up tires.
So we were going to use that to carve strips to make some kind of roadbed for shock absorb. We figured it'd be quieter, and it was stiff enough that it would hold nails and spikes even. So we were going to play with it, but we got into it, looking into it, researching it. It would be a lot of money to buy that. But then Brad Jonas, our other buddy, Brad Jonas, found an article in Model Railroader magazine, which I don't know how I missed it, but there was a guy using this Easy Mat to cut strips, made his own tools, kind of like the ones on the bottom left here, to cut it into strips and then laid it down. Well, I looked at that with Brad and Mike and decided we could improve on it 3 different ways. And we did, and we put together a clinic on it. And so that's kind of how it came out. The next slide will show you how we're using it, the strips that we cut. Oh, one of the nice things is those rolls are 4 feet wide. So you get 4 foot long strips, not the 3 foot long strips you have typically with cork roadbed. So it's even better. It's a foot longer. Well, you'll find out what our technique does is we have no trim waste, because what we do is slit a diagonal slit at 45, and then we flip over one piece and the other. So one side has the black adhesive on it and the other side doesn't, it's underneath. So because this material comes with its own adhesive on one side only, it's very strong adhesive. So this method, you actually then get an automatic center line because the black and the white contrast, and you can see the center to lay your track. It works really, really well. His whole layout was built this way, and it's still there today, and it runs great. So that's one technique. Flip on to the next one. And this is the PVC panels that Lou was talking about. Lou uses it for his backdrops because it's dimensionally stable to humidity and temperature, especially humidity. The problem with a lot of construction materials and model railroads is they're subject to humidity changes. So if you use wood, if you use masonite for fascias or profile boards or backdrops, masonite absorbs moisture and expands and contracts. It's not good, and you end up getting cracks at the joints. So you really need something inert. Well, this is why we went to these PVC panels. Not only do they come pre-finished in any color you want, in this case, black. You see the upper panel there, the lighting valence. You can hardly see it in the picture because it's so hidden because it's black, but it's a big black valence there, 2 feet deep. And it works wonderfully. It's lightweight. It cuts with a utility knife, and it glues with PVC cement. And it's really, really, really nice. And so I use it for that. I think I could use it for profile boards. On a logger's layout, those profile boards are actually masonite, but I think we could use it for that. And Lou's using it for the backdrop panels because it's dimensionally stable. It doesn't wrinkle his pasted on backdrops. So next one.
John,
Yeah.
let me interrupt you here, man, because we've got another question from one of our viewers.
Okay.
He'd like to know where he can see the latest clinic timeline that you talked about.
It's on the Cincinnati Division 7 website. Like I mentioned, under the Modeler's Aid tab.
Jim, I text you the URL for that on our chat line there, if you looked at that.
Yeah, but you just go to the Cincinnati Division 7 website, Cincinnati NMRA, whatever you want to Google on. You Google on all those, you'll find it. And you go to the website, go to the Modeler's Aid tab. There's a Modeler's Aid tab on the little gantry. You pick on that, it's a little square. And then in that list down below, there's a big list of clinics. There's like 100 clinics, single line, 100 in a row, 50, at least 50 anyway. And you'll find it. It's towards the top of that list. Timelines 1, timelines 2.
Gotcha. And I do have the URL here if anybody wants it. It's https:// CINCY dash DIV 7 dash org. So it's
.org, Jim.
I'm sorry?
You said .org, it's .org.
.org, I'm sorry. So it's https:// CINCY dash division DIV 7 .org.
Right.
And that'll take you to what you're looking for.
Yes, cincy-div7.org.
That's it.
Yeah, and I'm the webmaster, and I don't remember that because I don't need to.
I had to look it up.
Yeah, I mean, you just Google, people. Just Google. Use your Google search engine.
If you Google Eastern Loggers, you'll find it.
Yeah, you can Google Eastern Loggers too. You can a lot of things. All right. Well, this is the Shay clinic that Mike and I worked on heavily, and we're still working on some of this. But Bachmann Shays are wonderful models, a beautiful precision, their scale, they're wonderful. The only problem is they made these tiny helical gears and these tiny line shafts, scale dimensions, and they don't work in plastic and soft metal. And that's what they used. And so every one of these Bachmann Shays, without exception that we found, every one, those little gears will crack eventually. What happens, they deplasticize. They're squeezed and hoop stressed by being pressed onto the shafts. And so they're under constant stress. When they deplasticize, they just crack, and then they go out of pitch, and then they bind, and then nasty things happen like you don't know it. And then you get a heat buildup from the current, and they start melting plastic parts. It's a nightmare, and nobody knows how to fix them. Fortunately, Northwest Short Line sells replacement metal gears, but you can't get them on the shaft without learning a few things that we learned. And in fact, you don't even want to use the old shafts because they're too soft. You got to use harder metal shafts. So we did lots of changes in the other parts, and we can fix almost anything on these Shays now. We're still working through a couple little nuances, but we're pretty much there. So unfortunately, and they don't make the parts, they don't make the engines anymore. And even if you got their parts, they would break again as well. So it doesn't matter. Anyway, so these are going for a lot of money on eBay right now, but they're nearly all broken. So I don't know why people are buying them. But anyway, they look good though. They look really good. But we got them all fixed, and we got a fleet of them. All right, next slide. Oh, these are some of the replacement parts we made. Most of these white parts, I think Mike made here. This one down on the bottom left I made, and there's a few others. But we're still working through that. There are those Northwest Short Line gears too. All right, next slide. All right, this is the last slide in the innovations, and this is the one Mike was talking about with the stopping blocks. These are electrical stopping blocks, and what these do, and the bottom diagram shows them in red, where it says loco length, X and Y. Those are the two stopping blocks. What those stopping blocks do is they prevent a train that's coming, say, on the bottom track to the right, from left to right, the bottom track of a locomotive is coming in. And if that switch is thrown to the straight route, which it is right now, then normally the electrical polarities would clash when you get to the frog. And not only would it short, but you'd also have a derailment eventually, mechanical derailment, because the rail's thrown the wrong way. So, and operators on other railroads do this all the time because they don't pay attention. They don't see what the switch is thrown, which way it's thrown, and they go through them a lot. So I decided a long time ago, I didn't want to have that when the loggers lay out. So I developed these stopping blocks using extra contacts on our switch machines that run the switch. And what it does is it depowers, it takes the power away from those red blocks if the route is switched against you. So like Y would be a dead track if the switch was thrown the way it is now. So any train coming from the bottom would just stop because it would be dead current. And the same way the X would be dead if the switch was thrown the other way. So that's what we did. And the whole Eastern Loggers layout is built this way. And I'll tell you, it's saved a lot of shorts and a lot of derailments. And I don't know why people to this day don't do this. I understand if diesel latch ups, you have longer engine blocks, but you can make that block twice as long by taking it all the way to the frog gap, actually. So you can make it at least twice as long and go into the fouling point. And you could even go longer than that if you want to go the other way. So anyway, that's stopping blocks. It requires a little bit extra wiring, but it's really not that onerous. And it really saves an operation. So
that's fantastic. Well, listen, let me ask you this. You working on any new innovations now?
Yeah, I am. Well, two actually. One, we're still fine tuning a couple of replacement parts for those Shays. We got some new ideas we're going to try when we came back from running it over the July 4th weekend. But the big news is I want to work on my own layout now that I have an empty basement, and I've got an idea on how to advance the foam board method even into another arena to make it even easier to carve the track areas. And I'll just leave it at that because it's kind of a secret right now. But I've got the pieces of it. I've showed it to Mike and run it through him, and I've showed it to one other local modeler. And I've got a couple things, 1.5 things to do on it yet before I prove it all out. But if that works, it could be as big an impact on the hobby as the foam board method was, even bigger maybe. So we'll see how that works.
You share that when you get it finally developed, because it sounds very interesting.
We'll let you know.
All right. Well, listen, you keep talking about the Eastern loggers, and I know that you've got a fantastic lumber model railroad that you all have built. What got you involved in that particular industry?
Well, the short answer on that is easy. The short answer is Shay geared, not that one yet, but Shay geared locomotives. If anybody knows about Shays, if you've ever seen a Shay run, then you would almost instantly fall in love with it. It's got all these moving mechanisms on the one side and nothing on the other side. It's really, really quite fascinating. You saw that Bachman Shay picture we just had with all those gears. Well, you can imagine those running correctly and running down the track, everything moving at once. That I fell in love with. When I worked at Mitchell's Family Store, I had an employee discount of 10%. I saved up my money from working there, my paper route money, and I bought my first brass Shay locomotive because that's all it was available back then as for a geared steam locomotive was a Shay brass. And I bought a PFM United Pacific Coast Shay for $54. And it was 10% off of the $60 list price at the time.
Yeah.
That was a ridiculously low price, but it was high for then for my money. And anyway, I still have that engine, but I of course I switched more to plastic. But those geared steam engines, and it's not just the Shays, there's Climaxes and Heislers, is what made me fall in love with logging. Then I started seeing some prototype books about prototype railroads, real railroads for logging. I fell in love with all the pictures of those, and I got involved with that. And then when Jerry Strangarity here locally, he's our founder of the Eastern Loggers, he put a notice in the local newsletter, NMRA newsletter, on anybody wanting to get together to form a Pennsylvania logging group for making a sectional layout or a modular layout. And I jumped on that like immediately and joined him and two others. And we started the Eastern Loggers. You'll see a picture of us in a moment. But then another thing that happened along the way that spurred us all on was this series of books right here you're looking at. There's 13 books on the logging railroad era of lumbering in Pennsylvania. These books were printed. They weren't published by 3 different authors. They also have 2 other, an addendum and an index. And those 15 books together are just a wonderful reference source of the real railroads with lots of cool pictures, all the different industries. And so this was our Bible to build the Eastern Loggers layout. So that's why I got involved in all this.
I got you. Well, listen, you've, as I said, you're a great modeler, and we know that. So let's take a look at some more of your photos, and maybe you and your friends can comment on what we're looking at here.
I think there were 2 more in this section, but they might be supportive of that same let's see the next pictures.
Okay.
Yeah, these were other Shay locomotive books. Oh, by the way, I didn't want to, if you can see me, can you see this? Let's see. Yeah, there's one other recent book on Shays that was published. Whoops. There we go. Recent book on Shays, and I've been reading it, and it's really thick. It's like 1.5 inches thick. And it's awesome as well. But that yellow one in this book, and then the red one on the upper right with it, that's volume 1 and volume 2 of the incredible Bible about the Shays. It's amazing. Lots of other reference books. If you flip to the next one, you'll see the Eastern loggers themselves, and it kind of fits in the other pictures. As let's give a good lead in. These pictures are a series of group shots of the Eastern loggers over the years at different times. But what's in, and I think almost all the prominent players are at least shown once in these pictures, so that's good. There were 24 modelers that had some impact on the Eastern loggers layout, and so I've compiled those recently. That's why I know that, because we're using it for some kind of a plaque, which we'll get to in a bit. But you can see that the original 4 of us are the bottom left there. And we're got these goofy outfits on because we were wood hicks, lumberjacks and wood hicks. We are trying to make a big difference. There's a big difference between Pennsylvania logging or Eastern logging and Western logging. Most modelers model a Western logging. Most of the reference materials and the real railroad information and picture books are all Western railroading logging. There aren't that many for Eastern logging. And so that's why we're trying to make the distinction. And we kind of spell the differences when we built the layout. It was one of our objectives of doing this. But anyway, we were dressed up kind of corny back then. But Jerry Strangeri's the far right one, and I'm the far left one in that picture. The 2 gentlemen in the middle, unfortunately, are both deceased. They both struggled with Alzheimer's. But they were wonderful people, especially the guy with the beanie cap on, the Larry Pockrass. He was cool. The picture on the bottom right is more recent, and the one above that, I think, was when Lou shot the Great Model Railroads article. And then in the middle, the other 2 pictures on the left corners, in the middle and the left corner, that's real interesting because those are not the Eastern loggers layouts you might imagine seeing that. Those are door prize layouts that we built, and then we donated to our fall show as the grand door prize. So the monies for the materials were paid for by the division, but we did all the labor and built it all and the ideas. And so we did that 2 times. In fact, it was one of our community outreach projects, if you will. So it was kind of fun. All right. So with that as a background, let's get into the Eastern loggers a little more. Next slide. The layout. Yeah. Here's one more view of the overall layout. You see the sawmill complex on the left. And you see a whole bunch of stacks of lumber in the front center here on the corner. That's 2.5 million scale board feet of lumber. And it was all stacked by hand. That's not hollow inside over a 3-year period of one guy watching TV. And it wasn't me. I wouldn't do that, but I probably would if I was crazy enough. But the other guy did it. And but what's more interesting even still is all that wood was cut on a real table saw, full-size table saw, using a veneer blade. So the veneer blade is wider than the wood you're cutting, obviously. So you're getting a lot more sawdust than you do real wood out of it. But anyway, that's just an example of the extremes we went to build this layout. So it's cool. Let's see the next picture. All right, this is a track plan of the whole layout. By the way, interesting thought here, but when is it a track plan or should it really be called a layout plan?
Yeah.
And because my point is a track plan isn't just a track, it's also the structures and the scenes and all that. So to me, and the waterways, so to me, it's a layout plan, not a track plan, but we all call it track plans in the hobby. And that's just another sidelight. And that's one of my fascinating, I teach a class in that as well. But anyway, you can see we have a loop all the way around. That's the boulder lines. And then we have a high line on the top side. We have a high line reached by a double switchback on the left side. And then we have inside, we have a horseshoe shaped staging yard with 4 tracks. And there are 2 trains on each track. lengthwise. So you got 8 trains and staging inside on the bottom level. And then on the upper level, on the end on the right, behind the module on the right center, you'll see a 2-track staging yard on the upper high line. So it's built for operations, but it's also built for scenery. It's also built for rail fanning. It's also built for shows. It's really fascinating to run because the switchback lengths are too short to run a full train. So you have to double the hill and things like that. Every section was designed. We designed all this on purpose to have every section have some water and every section have some switching. So we kind of did that way. And then we violated that towards the end with the 2 new sections. They don't have any water. We extended it later on when we used to have 8, but we went to 10 sections because we expanded so much. So, and we have standard and narrow gauge and all that. So if you flip the next slide, you'll get some more views of some of the technology. And this is another thing we developed because it's portable, but also because you have to operate next to it. We recess all our controls, and that not only helps to avoid damage to the controls when you slide them in and out of a car, but it also helps so you don't snag them with your clothing when you're walking by, when you operate. Because we operate from the outside, not from the inside, like a lot of modular groups do. We operate from the outside. We want to be next to the public and talk to the public. Plus, we have a backdrop, so it makes it kind of hard. Now, the other cool thing you'll notice is there's no letters and no numbers on these control panels. None of them. And the reason why is you don't need them. Everything's explanatory by the color coding. The red switch block control turns on and off and selects which cab you want for the red. And I say which cab because this layout used to be wired for cab control, and it still is, but we switch them all to cab number 8 now when you use command control. So we don't do that. The staging yard is real interesting. The upper right, that's the horseshoe shaped staging yard. And you'll see that the red bars there are those stopping blocks I was talking about, but these are different kinds of stopping blocks. And some of them are next to the switches, but others are in the middle of the track, and they have individual on-off switches. So what you do is you don't need to see inside the staging yard to run trains. You simply, when you run a train in, you simply turn off the stopping blocks where you want the engines to stop, and they'll just automatically stop with no power, and you don't even have to see it. As long as you keep straight on which trains you put into which track, you're all right. So next slide, you'll see more of the layout now, I think. Oh, no, this is a schematic. For those of you that are geeks like some of us, this is a wiring diagram. We did a thorough wire diagram. I did nearly all these wiring diagrams. And so that we have any debugging, we have all the documentation we need to debug. Now, this is one thing I'm really proud of, and Mike owns part of the credit on this, and one other guy in our group that's since moved to Florida, another Mike. The 3 of us generally did nearly all the wiring on the layout, and I can tell you we never had any bugs in any of our wiring, ever. Everything worked as planned, but we double-checked and triple-checked when we ran every wire. So because of that, we never had any problem with an incorrect wire on the layout. And that's got to be a feat that's amazing for the complicated layout this one is. All right, flip it if you will. And there we go. Now we get some scenes. Now these are early on. You notice the picture on the right is pretty shallow. That's only 2.5 modules deep, really. 3 modules deep, whatever it was. Back when we had 8 modules, we since made that 5 feet longer, and it looks way more impressive with the extra 5 feet. And you'll also notice these are fall colors. Originally, we decided to use fall colors, but it was really hard to get the fall colors right. And we decided it wasn't worth the effort to try to make it all right. So we switched it all back to green, the summertime, basically. You also notice the picture on the left there. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah, the picture on the left, you'll see that log down in the front foreground. That's a piece of sagebrush. Just broke it right off of a piece of sagebrush. We use sagebrush for some of our fancier trees for the armatures, but this one looked so straight and so nice with the bark texture. We just threw it down there as a fallen tree. That's an example of something that just happens. When you see it, you go with it, you know. Next slide, please. Now, this is the shot on the left was on the cover of the NMRA magazine I showed you earlier. And the one I took it with my old Contax camera, actually. And that was a slide. And then the one on the left is a high bridge area with some of the rock carvings underneath. You'll see this again in a few minutes because I want to talk about the bridge. Go ahead and flip it. And then this, we talked about trees. The scene on the left here, the trees in the background, those are an example of how you can make fast trees that look pretty decent. And those are made from a wild hydrangea. And then we sprinkle on Woodland Scenics ground foam, really fine ground foam. We generally use the darker colors of ground foam, not the lighter. Lighter colors don't show up well in photos. You notice like this, the bottom weeds down there, the yellow patch, it doesn't look real good in this photo. And the picture on the right, this is a scene that we modeled directly out of a picture in the logging books of the town of Leetonia, Pennsylvania. And what's interesting is we splayed out those 4 company houses are actually out in a radial pattern. You can't see too well from this view, but they're in a slight radial pattern. They're not parallel to each other. In the real world, they were parallel, but I decided to make them radial because it kind of fit the curvature of the road in front of it better. And so we used a little artistic license there. But what's also cool is the roof lines of the ends of those shed roofs and the outhouses in the backyards of all those houses. Those are exactly what's in the pictures in the book. Each one of those sheds are different and the roof lines are different.
John, let me interrupt you again here.
Yeah.
We've got a question from one of the viewers. How do we tell the difference between an eastern and a western logging railroad?
Well, there's a bunch of big differences, and then there's subtle differences. The big difference is the trees were much smaller. You know, Western Railroad, those trees are monster, you know, especially when you get into redwoods, sequoias, all that. But in general, Western Railroad logs were much larger and different species for that matter. You know, but the other common trait is that the logging was more primitive in the Eastern logging versus Western. Western logging was more mechanized, had more modern machinery. And they had different log loaders, much bigger steel log loaders, all that. Eastern logging was much more primitive. They mostly used steam donkeys, and the only real mechanism they had mostly were the Barnhart loaders. And those were a combination of wood and steel, and they're fascinating in themselves. But they were very prevalent. Barnhart loaders were in the East. They were not prevalent in the West. They had McGiffert loaders and a bunch of other loaders. So those are two differences. Another one difference is there were log flumes out West. There were very few, if none, log flumes out East. There were log slides out East. And log slides were made with splitting a log down the middle, splaying it out into a V shape, staking it with other logs underneath it, and dragging the logs down with mules and oxen. And you know what they've used to make the logs slide better on those slides? They smeared lard on them. So if anybody wants to model the smells of lard on their model railroad, they could do it technically. But I don't know if you get a scale fly in there or not, flying around it. But anyway, so those are some of the differences. You can look at those logging books and see more of the differences. But those logging books are a fascinating read. I can't tell you how many times I've read those books. Next slide. Good question there. Next slide. All right. This one gets into the gunpowder mills. This is a customer of the charcoal, because charcoal is one of the 3 main ingredients for gunpowder. And charcoal is a byproduct of the wood chemical plants, which are, in this case, is right next to the next door module or next door section. But it's separated by scenic trees treatments. But these are gunpowder mills that I created from scratch, from taking commercial abutments, plaster castings of abutments and wing walls. And then I reshaped them into the walls I needed for these structures. And then I cast those with latex molds. And then I poured the plaster in those and used those to build this. And then painted them. So I kind of went through several stages of casting to get these made like this. These are representing gunpowder mills, and they're designed this way to blow up towards the river when they blew up. and they did blow up occasionally, which is why they were built this way. And if you go to Wilmington, Delaware, the home of the DuPont Chemical Company, there's a very unique museum you must see there called Hagley Museum, Hagley, and you will see 30 of these structures along the scenic banks of the Brandywine River, and you can walk. It's a very linear museum. It's like 2 miles long, and it has exhibit buildings halfway, the exhibit buildings in the beginning, and then it has that mansion on top of the hill at the end, and with a barn and a DuPont automobile and all sorts of cool things. It's a really neat museum. It's like a mini Williamsburg type thing. You really ought to go there. It's fascinating. You'll see all these structures. And they actually have working mechanisms in them running with demonstrations on the hour sometimes. So you ought to go to see that. Anyway, that's a very unique part of this railroad. Flip to the next one. I think there's a couple more. This is another, it's not an innovation because people have cast log cars before, but the problem with logging modeling, if you have skeleton log cars like these are, how do you make them heavy enough to run on the rails when they're empty? So you can't make them out of wood. You can't make them out of plastic. I mean, people have done that, but they don't run well. Even if you put metal trucks on them like we do, they still don't run well. They don't track well. They don't have enough weight. So the answer we came up with, and I think Mike and I collaborated on this some, but I came up with making a pattern and then making a room temperature vulcanized rubber mold of it, and then casting them in white metal. And so in a lower temperature white metal so that we can melt it with a blowtorch and pour it in. And we did that. However, we had all sorts of problems. We couldn't get it, all the fine detail to be cast in it correctly. Just wouldn't do it. And then we finally realized, we found out, I talked to somebody at work actually, and the guy said, you've got to preheat the mold. So I preheated the mold, and sure enough, it worked. So we did some of these, and you can see some of the castings in the upper left corner, just barely, some of the raw white metal castings. And then it comes into these initially painted grimy black, and then we hit them with chalks to weather them, and you get that bottom photo. It looks beautiful. Yeah, it's good enough for logging. Next picture.
That's amazing that you came up with that technique. That's just amazing.
Yeah, well, necessity is a mother of invention, right? It had to be out of metal, and we weren't going to mill every one out of metal. That would take forever. Metal bars. So we did this. Now, this picture in the upper left, that was on the calendar picture again. And this is some of the early pictures with fall colors in the bottom left. But what I wanted to show here, there's 3 different bridges in this picture. The one bridge, we call that the high bridge, the upper left. That's real technical, the high bridge. And then we have part of the log cribbing that's on Mike Teener's original module. And that log cribbing, since we have, remember, the solid styrofoam here. So that log cribbing was built right side up, like they would build it in the real world. We dug in to the styrofoam, made holes for the different members, and cut and placed all the wood logs across to make the cribbing for the trestle. So we did it live right there. And then this last one is an N-scale Atlas girder bridge I used for an HO scale iron bridge that crossed over the sluiceway, actually the Brandywine Creek, where the dam is to build up for the sluiceway. So those are examples of bridges. There are actually a lot of other bridges on the layout, some of which match pictures in the books exactly. But I'll tell you a story about this high bridge in a second. The next slide, go ahead.
But John, this is part of the creativity you're talking about for model railroading. I mean, it's not all just open a box and put it on a piece of plywood. There's a tremendous amount of creativity and thought that goes into it.
Yeah, you have to design everything. That's why I said, is it layout design or is it track design? Yeah. I think it's both. You got to design the scenery around you got to figure out what's the purpose of your railroad. Yeah. You know, I mean, you don't have to, but it's more fun if you do, because then you follow a theme, and then you got to make things consistent with the theme as best you can. I mean, sometimes you use artistic license, but you know what you're doing at least. This is that bridge I was telling you about. The bottom right photo is the one that's in my background right now, but it's one that I took after Lou took a better shot of that for the magazine article that's in the can waiting to be published. but it shows a lot of cool things, but mainly it shows the high bridge. Now you will notice, I'm a structural engineer, so this bothered me for years, but you will notice in the blue photo there on the bottom right, that bridge is not structurally correct. If anybody knows anything about bridges, you know that the bridge has to have its own bent supporting its end. It can't hang on a crossboard off of a bent. The bolts would not have enough strength. It would shear right through the wood, the bridge. So you needed your own bent underneath each end of that bridge, inboard of those bents that are already there going all the way up to the trestle top. So it bothered me for years. I didn't fix that. And I knew the layout was leaving the basement soon. I had to fix that before it left. So if you see the picture on the left, that's a quick shot I made. It wasn't near professional quality, but you can see there's two bents on that leftmost bridge support. There's a bent underneath the bridge, and same way on the other side, but you can't see it so well. If you flip to the next slide, you'll see a little better. All right, there we go. I think this is the last slide, but you'll see that now the bottom picture, it doesn't have the extra bent in it. The top picture, you can clearly see the two extra inboard bents. Clearly see them, the top left picture. And that is correct. And so now I'm relieved because it won't collapse anytime soon. So.
Well, you know, you're talking about coming up with a purpose for the railroad to start with, and then coming up with other ideas about what the scenery is going to look like and everything. John, how do you get your various scenes to blend together so well, to make the total railroad so consistently looking like a real railroad?
Well, that was one of the big goals of our layout when we started, because remember, our goal was we wanted to show the public what you could do to make a scale railroad and make it portable and make it look consistent theme all the way around and not look like a checkerboard like a lot of the modular setups are, because everybody brings their own module and puts them together. But they're not related scenery-wise or theme-wise. And so this is what we wanted to do, and that was one of our big goals. So the key is, how do we blend those different sections together, right? How do we make it look good? And one of the first things we did, we have a little black book of our standards that I published for everybody to use, and I gave everybody a copy of it. But one of our things we picked was, what colors of ground foam rubber are we going to use? What colors? And we decided to use the darker green. And actually in woodland sinks, the fine dark green is not called green, it's called weeds. It's actually called weeds. And it is the darkest green. And we use that. We do not use a light green hardly at all. We will do a burnt grass type green to highlight leaves on a tree and to highlight a few other areas to get a lighter texture somewhere. But we don't use a lot of that because light colors do not photograph well. And they don't look well in person either if you get a lot of light on them. So we decided to do that. So that was our standard. We also decided to standardize on the dirt. We use a specific type of very fine dirt from Smith & Sons. I think they're no longer in business. Used to be in Ohio. And I have a stash of that still, but it's a very, very fine, almost like dust, like powder. It's almost like powder we use for our fine dirt. And it's a certain color that's kind of a tan brown color that's really nice. So we did things like that to standardize. We did a lot of that. The other thing that helped is we brought the modules together often together. Usually every Thursday night we worked in the early years, and we brought them all to somebody's house to work on. Eventually it got too hard to keep bringing them, taking them apart, putting them together. So we more or less left them at my house most of the time. And then everybody would come to work on them. So we would match scenery, make sure it would work across the slide. So that's how we did it. The tree armatures are the same way. We picked the certain types of weed trees. We, like I mentioned, the wild hydrangea, and we use sagebrush trees. We have some goldenrod trees. They don't look as nice. We throw them in the back as fillers. So we blend it all and make sure it looks good.
We, looking at your railroad and looking at the various scenes, the level of detail I think is just extraordinary. So how do you come up with these scenes? I mean, is it based on a prototype you've seen? Do you just create them out of your mind? Where does the inspiration come from?
Well, fortunately, we had those series of books. And that helped us a lot. So I would say it starts, you got to decide what kind of elements you want in your scene. You know, once you've decided your overall theme of the thing, like what area of the country it is, what type of railroading you want to do, and you say, okay, what are the elements I want in it? Now, one of the first things we did with the loggers, we made a list of all the different types of industries or structures we'd like to see in the layout, like certain bridges, certain kinds of industries, certain kinds of company houses, et cetera. If we had a certain city or town from the logging books we wanted to model almost verbatim, we'd say that too. So we came up with a list, but it's kind of fun to do that, actually, just brainstorm things you want in your railroad. And then you got to kind of lay it all on paper and come up with a suitable track plan that weaves all these things together. And I say it's more than a track plan, it's more of a layout plan, because you also plan the scenic blocks between the scenic barriers, and you basically figure out, you know, how the structures get served by the railroad. So you got to get them on sidings and stuff. And you just go from there and you try. With the loggers, it was cool because we just had 2.5 by 5 foot sections, and we had to put some kind of a scene in each one, or more than one scene in each one. So you had a limited space to work in. And so you had to get creative on what you could put in that scene, what you couldn't. You saw that high bridge. The high bridge was actually diagonally across a corner module. And the reason why is because the switchback is kind of 2 parts of a Y, if you will. The switchback fit better in that dimension diagonally, but it also looked better. That's another rule in layout design. And Lou knows this, and some of the others know this, is you never make track parallel to the front edge of your layout. Yeah. If you want your layout to look bigger, you never do that. So you always make it crooked from the front edge in some way. Mike's module, we actually made an S-curve, double track S-curve passing siding, and we S-curved it through his layout. And we also subtly reduced by 1/8 of an inch the one track from the other. That caused us no end of pain in laying that track, but it made it look way better in person. So you got to think about the aesthetics when you're designing a layout too. It's not just the elements plopping them in an order. Don't think 2-dimensionally, think 3-dimensionally. That's the other learning.
You know what strikes me hearing you talk about the answer to that question is you had an awful lot of fun in this part of building this railroad.
Oh,
this wasn't considered work by you guys.
Oh, no, not at all. It was Thursday night relief, stress relief is what it was.
This was a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And that's another advantage. That's another advantage of model railroading. I recommend nobody do it alone.
Right.
Because of that. Nobody should do this alone. Even though I was a loner before that, once we joined that group, man, and we had a theme and we had stuff we knew we could do, we went for it. It was fun.
One of the aspects of the
it sounds like it.
Planning and idea of not having the track parallel to the front edge of the layout. Along with that, as far as the inspiration, one of the covers of the model of the logging books is a picture of a crib trestle. And when I saw that, I wanted to put that crib trestle on my module. And that's what John was pointing out a while ago. But you're asking about where we get inspirations for stuff like that. And that crib trestle idea came from the cover of those books.
Yeah. It's amazing, gentlemen. It really is. Well, listen, all of you have seen a lot of John's modeling. You've seen his teaching. You've seen the volunteering that he does, and you've heard him talk now for some time about these different activities. What do you think his greatest contribution to the hobby is? Mike, how would you answer that?
As far as John's greatest contribution to the hobby?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I honestly, I wouldn't know where to begin to answer that question because there's so many. I think I tease John a lot about a couple of things. John
I'm not even going to go there.
John is a blessing to the world of model railroading, and he will understand what I mean by that. But he has contributed in so many ways, and it's just a selfless act. I mean, we there was a time when the Eastern Loggers was going through a little bit of a bumpy road, and some folks didn't realize what John and Ruth Ann, actually Ruth Ann is part of this too. They opened their home every week to a group of guys and allowed us to come there. They stored all of our layout. They stored tools, they stored supplies, provided snacks and drinks, and you know, I mean, people would contribute to that, but you know, for the longest time, we had a place to keep the model railroad, and some folks just didn't realize what that was actually worth. And anyway, that's not have anything to do with John's contribution to model railroading, but I think you know, just the overall amount, the volume of work that he has contributed. Chuck and I have had a conversation like, you know, how would you replace a John Burchnall? You don't. That's the answer to that. You just don't. Yeah. But anyway.
Lou, how about you? How would you describe it?
Well, Mike has pretty well done a pretty good job of some aspects of John's personality. I'm going to get back at John covered this subject earlier pretty good, but I want to reemphasize it. And I think that John, for years, has been a driving force in the Cincinnati division of the NMRA. And as John said previously, I photographed, you have to pardon me, John, I don't know the exact number, but about 300 model railroads for Kalmbach. And John, as he said, has discovered just about a third of them. Many of them have been in and around Cincinnati. And as far as I'm concerned, John put Cincinnati division in the limelight of the NMRA, in the limelight, the national limelight, by having it in the pages of MR and GMR. He continues to do that to this day. He's accomplishing the same thing for layout owners he meets even now with railroads who have railroads that impress him. He's really proud of his, one thing that I really admire about John is that he's as proud as he is as proud of his friends' accomplishments as he is of his own. And he doesn't hesitate to let that be known actually to almost anybody he meets. There's not a jealous bone in his body. I can honestly say that I am thankful to have met him and Ruth Ann too. And Cheryl and I are both proud to count them among our closest of friends.
Well, you know, the last part that you said, I think that's been obvious in this show tonight, the way that he's given credit to everybody that's been involved with him. So I think I understand what you're saying. And Chuck, how about you? How would you address this?
Well, first, I want to regress on what John was talking about, the natural dirt that he had stashed away. And I would suggest to the viewers out there, if you want some very fine, real dirt, go to a baseball field, yeah, and especially around the batter's box. Of course, I did that once about 3 o'clock in the morning after I got off work, and a local policeman came by to ask me what the hell I was doing, digging, putting in a can. Anyway, as far as what I think his greatest contribution is a little bit different than the gentleman who spoke earlier. I think that one of the greatest things about the NMRA is the camaraderie, the interaction between the members. I mean, you could model without a belonging, but you get so much more when you have that interaction. And I'll tell you what, I've known John since I joined Division 7 about 11 years ago when I moved here. And I've learned over that time that his steadfast dedication and prodigious contributions to Division 7 were very inspiring to me. And he was one of the people who, even though I was a new member, who suggested that I get more involved as far as chairmanships and running for different office. I worked closely and in concert with John for the past 6 years, through the 4 years I served as assistant super and now as super. And John has been a most valuable advisor and mentor for me. He's always available and willing to share his vast knowledge and experience, both in modeling methods and the workings of the NMRA. His contributions of knowledge and expertise, his guidance, his initiative, his volunteerism has been invaluable to Division 7. Just as Mike was saying, John was mentioning some of the things that he has done for the, that he's volunteered for the division. One of the greatest things is when we were suffering through COVID, John had the idea of doing all our meetings on Zoom. And he took the bull by the horns and he initiated all that and figured out how to do it. And for 18 months, he went through the work of leading our division to keep it together. And that was a very important thing that he did. And to this day, he still runs the Zooms for our BOD meeting. John has always been a very active ambassador promoting Division 7 and the NMRA. And to everyone that he encounters, whether it's at the shows or flea markets or a hobby shop or on the street at the grocery store, if he runs into somebody, he'll start talking about it. And it's amazing his influence on people in our division. I don't know what we would do without his dedication.
Sounds like what we need to do is try to clone him and just drop him around the country.
I want to call the Vatican and see if we can canonize him.
John, one of the things that I've heard is that the Eastern Augers Railroad now is in a museum, and it's a major exhibit of that museum. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's Mike and I have been doing that move, but I think I have a slide on this. But what happened is because the layout is portable, we had the option of now donating it to somebody. Because long term, what are we going to do with the layout? It'd be a shame if everybody took their sections and kept them individually and the layout never came back together again. I mean, the layout is important together more so than the individual pieces. So we decided, well, long term, we're not getting any younger, any of us. What are we going to do with this layout? And, what if something happened to me or Mike or something? What do we do? So we ended up trying to interview a couple museums. We ended up getting receptivity at the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum. So you see a picture here now, that's their main building on the left, but they have a bunch of buildings in the back. They have a real 3-truck Shay, or they have the only restored Barnhart log loader in the world in there. They have a working sawmill, working steam-powered sawmill, lots of cool camp buildings, but they also have a building to the right that has a, is it a Plymouth diesel? I can't remember the diesel that's in there. Brookline. Brookville. Okay. Anyway, in the other half of the building, you see the open door on the bottom right. That's the other half of the building. They had a storage area, which turned out was perfect size to fit our layout. So we have moved the layout there. We are in the process of donating it permanently there. And we've already had 2 big festivals where it was featured and operated. Mike and I operated both of those. They have a 3rd festival coming out in October. We can't be there, but there's enough other operators we think they'll be able to be all right. And so we're building a local model railroad group to support that layout long term. And they're building exhibits around the layout, around the walls with some pictures and stuff that we provided them and other things. And so it's being developed into a major attraction. And what's unique, and so it moved there in November. What's unique is, and COVID slowed that down, by the way. It would have been a year and a half earlier had it not been for COVID. But what is unique and what they really like is they don't even care if it runs necessarily, because even if it's not running with all the rolling stock on it, the engines and everything, it tells a big story. And it tells a story that they couldn't tell any other way, because this is the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum, but they had no way to really tell the whole story about all the lumber product industries that were associated with logging and lumbering back then. You got to remember, in the 1920s, when this layout is based on, the logging and the lumbering, the wood products industries were the number one industry in the world.
Yep.
It wasn't oil, it wasn't automobiles, it was wood products. All your chemicals came from wood products. They distilled it all out. I mean, everything came out of the wood. You won't believe the number of wood products. Well, we've modeled nearly every one of those industries on the layout. We haven't modeled about 4 or 6 that we probably could have, but we didn't have room for. But we modeled a whole variety of industries that most people have never seen in their lives, never even understood that they were industries. And so this thing tells a big story. I mean, just the fact that there's switchbacks on it, they don't have a real railroad here to tell the whole story. They just have an engine and a barn heart and a couple pieces of track. So the model railroad fills the gaps nicely in the museum, and they're tickled to death to have it. And every visitor that comes in and looks at it, the 2 times Mike and I have run at those festivals, people's jaws drops pretty much, and they are just thrilled. A lot of families come in with kids. A lot of mothers come in with the kids, and they love it. So it's really turning out to be a pretty major attraction there. And once they get all the different supporting exhibits around it right, it'll be something. I think there's one more slide on it, maybe. Let's see if there is. I think there, yeah, here's another view of that building. And then, here's what it looks like inside right now, but these are temporary walls. So the walls that are on the upper right slide there, those are just temporary. That's the initial attempt to do some kind of security barriers. We've since come up with a different design. It's not going to have posts in it. So that'll all be changed eventually. The bottom right is where it looked like before we had the walls up and before we put skirting on it and all that. But so it looks totally different from our basement. Didn't have the valance or the bottom skirting. And then the one on the lower left is kind of interesting. That's a simulation of how we could put big display pictures above the layout in place of the valance area, if you will. And if think of the post not being there, so it would look a little different. But we decided hopefully we'll make those a little smaller than that, because I don't want to take away from the layout that much. But anyway, that was a computer simulation of what we could do in that area. We've since put curtains on the windows so they don't have UV light on the layout and glare and all that. And we put better track lighting in and everything else. So it's quite different now. I don't have a recent photo. Anyway, that was us moving it. Took five minivan trips to move it. And
well, it's got to be a real honor for everybody that's worked on it to be remembered now for an awful long time in the future, just by knowing that it's been saved and that other people and their moms and kids and so forth can come and enjoy your work. I mean, that's really got to make you feel good.
Yeah, yes, it does very much so. But you got to remember it was almost accidental, because we didn't intend to do this long term originally when we started the group. Yeah. But because it was portable, it opened up this opportunity.
Yeah.
So that's a lesson to other model railroaders. If you make a nice layout in your basement, but it's permanent and it can't be moved, well, it's never going to leave your basement except with a Sawzall and a hatchet, maybe. So if everybody would think about making their layout sectional, even if it's for your basement for many years, make it sectional that you can someday donate parts of it, even not even the whole thing. You could donate parts of it. It would be much more satisfying and be much more helpful for the whole hobby too, to save it.
I agree, totally.
Lou's got a layout like that, by the way. His ON30 layout. It's all, well, it's semi-portable.
Well, I tell you, who are the people that most influenced your modeling and helped you learn how to build models, John?
Well, that one is pretty cool. Answer to that one. And there's another slide. I'd have to say my parents. These are my parents. They're both deceased now, but I like to remember them in the upper left picture because it's going to be hard. That's when they were younger. And that's when I remember them influencing me. What happened is my dad gave my brother-in-law that Lionel train set. Somehow he built the whole train table layout and surprised us on Christmas morning. I don't know if he did it in the basement of our neighbors and brought it over Christmas night. I don't know how he did that, but he built that. So he thought enough of us to do that to get us started. And my brother went into ham radio and audiophile stuff. He's an electrical engineer. And I stayed with the trains the whole way. So I kept going through succession. But a year or two after he gave us that, the next Christmas, he gave us a box, a train set box. I think it was a Mantua HO train set in a box with track and a few cars and an engine and a transformer. And he gave it to us as a box. And we had to then build it on that same 4x8 plywood. So we got rid of the Lionel and we built that, and then I took it over. So my dad started us twice, I have to say in the beginning, but then later on, my mother was the real inspiration. I can remember laying in bed with my mother and this is tough, and showing her the John Allen spread, full page spread, center section. I think it was a January 1969 issue of Model Railroader. And I told my mother then, that I would build something like that someday. I told her that then.
Well, you certainly accomplished that goal. There's no question about it.
So I won't go with these other NMRA guys, but I will tell you one. This Dave Clinton guy, there was a school teacher. So later on, I was in the hobby years later, well, about the same time, actually. I was on my bike. I had just had a bike because I was a teenager. And one of the NMRA members locally, when he found out I bought that Pacific Coast Shay, the brass one, he said, well, why don't you come over and I'll show you how to tune that up so it make it run more efficient. And so I said, oh, okay. And so I drove my bike over to his house, went down his basement. He had a nice layout with a logging branch line. And so he knew something about the brass shays. And he showed me how to take it apart. We took it apart, and then he showed me how to use wood wedges. I probably should have used brass wedges, but we use wood to shim the gearbox mechanisms up, loosen the bolts a little bit and shim them and just make a little tweak the straightness of the brackets holding up the gears so that, and we would monitor everything with an amp meter to see if we were drawing the least amount of amps to make it more efficient. And so we did all that and we fixed it and he made my Shay more efficient. And I always remember that to this day. So that shows you how one act of kindness to help someone lasts a lifetime.
Absolutely, it does. Right, and we need more of that in our hobby today.
Amen to that.
You've been passing it on ever since, John.
I guess I'm trying. Yeah. Wow. So those were the people that influenced me. So I was fortunate I had good influencers. Darn
right. Well, we all should have that kind of ability to have those kind of people in our lives. John, let me ask you this. When you're building a model and you sit back in a chair and you look at it, how do you know you're finished with that model and you can put it aside and start on something else?
Well,
how do you know when that model is good enough?
Well, I think it's relatively easy, but it may not be for others. The easy answer is it's done when it looks like what you're trying to model. I mean, if you have an idea in your mind what you're trying to model, and if it ends up looking like it, and you can't think of anything else to kind of make it significantly better, then it's done. That part of it's done, but of course the scene around it may not be done. You got more to do. So I think it's easy. So it's basically if the geometry, the details, and the finishing are right, then if they're not right, then you try to fix them. Otherwise, it's done. Now, there's one other thing you can do, and Lou understands this totally. Take a photo of it. And Chuck does too. Take a photo of it. If you take a photo of it and then look at the photo, and you will see right away the flaws. I mean, Lou lives this all the time in his business. I don't know how he deals with some of these owners he does, because he has to politically deal with the owner. When he sees something that's not going to photograph right, he can't photograph it, so he has to kind of make it better or move to something else. Well,
I saw that, not to interrupt, John, but
yeah,
I saw that done years and years ago. John Allen was the first time I ever saw that done. He had built the locomotive, and Cliff Grant took a photograph of it and told him to look closely at the photograph, and he could see any flaws. You don't see it in person because there's so much going on around it. But when you focus on your subject in a photograph and you study it, you can rectify a lot of faults that you wouldn't see just looking at the thing.
Well, and that's an example. Example could be that bridge. I showed you those bridges with those bents on that were missing for years, and I knew it, but nobody else knew it. If you were a structural engineer, you would know it, but nobody else knew it. But I knew it. It bothered me, and it took me 20 years to fix that.
Yeah.
So I finally fixed it before we donated it.
But you immediately knew the model wasn't finished.
Yeah, I know it.
You knew you had to do something about it.
And there was the same thing. The last thing, there was another photo after those I forgot to look at. There was another photo there. But I had some company houses that somebody else, one of the other guys built. I installed them, but they were missing railings on the porches, and they were missing steps going down to the ground. Yeah. And I knew we couldn't donate that. So remember, Mike, right at the last second, the night before we moved the layout pretty much, I figured out a way to make wood steps on those and stain them right and glue them in with, I used ACC to do it quick. And then I made a jig for the railings out of styrene, and I made these super fine wood that half of it broke on me, but I got it enough of pieces together I could do it, and I glued them on. And so that's an example, when you have a deadline, you tend to do things, but those things, that's another example of making it right. I felt I couldn't donate it without those railings on there.
Are your models a piece of art? Do you look at them as a piece of art or a piece of sculpture when you're finished with them?
Well, I definitely believe model railroads are three-dimensional art. There's no question that they are art. Just like a sculpture is three-dimensional, usually it's art, but a sculpture is usually stationary. Model railroad isn't, so that's an advantage. Sometimes you have mobiles that move. And there's other animated art sculptures out there, but they're kind of esoteric, if you will. But this is a realistic type 3D art. I don't see why model railroad, because 3 dimensions shouldn't be art when there are paintings that have basically similar content and they call that art. So they are art. I know Lou thinks it's art. But here's the other piece. It's more than art. It's all those other things we've been talking about all night. It's all the engineering and the mechanisms and it's also one other thing that's really cool is how the trains move through the scenery and sometimes through the ribbons of rail. You always hear that in real railroading, the ribbons of rail. Well, it's true. And the light gleams off the rail and the train going snaking through the scenery. It is awesome. So that is all art. Now it's interesting you mentioned sculpture though, because that foam board method that I developed, by carving trenches to glue the roadbed in for the track rather than building up on risers, the traditional method. Well, when you're carving trenches and then you carve the rest of the scenery out of the foam board, what are you doing? It's sculpture. You're carving an object, a solid material, and you're taking away the things that don't belong there to create what belongs there. So in a way, that foam board method is sculpting.
Absolutely. What do you all think about this? Is art an important part of model railroading? I mean, is model railroading art?
Certainly can be. I think, we've had a number of people that come to view the Eastern Loggers. As a matter of fact, when we were in Pennsylvania just this last time, a number of people would come up and say, this is art. This is a piece of art. And, you graciously say thank you. And yeah, but I wholeheartedly agree, it is.
They actually used an even better word. They used the word masterpiece. Several people
Yeah, they did.
This is a masterpiece.
Yep.
Masterpiece. We'd never heard that before when it was laid out with here.
All right.
Lou, what do you and Chuck think?
Well, myself, I agree with John wholeheartedly. Especially when you're dealing with scenery, structures, it's an art form. And John brought up a good point. Even sculpture, three-dimensional art is stationary, it's static. But as soon as you've gotten something moving, as soon as you've got it, let's say you're any scale, when you've got a train moving through the subject matter, which is the scenery, it becomes something you can interact with. And today's DCC with sound has made it even more impressive, because now you not only watch the trains moving through the scenery, but you can hear them. With the solitude, the lighting, with constant lighting and sound effects. It's just now they have sound effects. Nowadays there's all kinds of technology that has buildings that light up and things that are going on in the building. I don't know how many layouts I've seen with someone welding, a welder in a yard situation where they got a welder. I mean, all of this other stuff that's going on. It's not only three-dimensional art, it's actually moving, operating, and it's just that much more to enjoy. And it's that much more to get involved with the actual development of it. You can bring out, again, to get back to John and all this multi aspect of, it's the bench work and the electronics and the scenery, whatever. You can get out there and find out how all this stuff works and make it a part of your railroad. So it's definitely three-dimensional art, without a doubt.
Chuck, what do you think?
Well, like traditional art, paintings of whether it's still life, a portrait, or a landscape, seascape. In model railroading, if you can mimic life, your surroundings, that's art. Same as a painting. I think it takes imagination. It takes reference to the real world, and you are creating that replication.
I agree. I think that I don't think art is talked about in model railroading enough personally. I think it's a major part of our hobby. I think, yes, there's technical aspects of our hobby and so forth, but I think that underneath everything is the artistic part of our hobby that binds it all together.
That might be why some people are scared of scenery, because in the hobby, it's pretty much a stigma. Probably 80% of the people are scared of doing scenery.
Yeah.
And it might be because they think they need to be an artist to do that. And they think they don't have any artistic touch in them. But if you learn some of these simple techniques, like we talked about wet on wet and a few other, the rock stuff that you do, Chuck, and a few other things, if they learn the simple techniques, and Lou's been documenting them for years in his books, all these methods, it's not that hard. It's almost like a recipe.
That's right.
Well, and the main part of it is you've just got to try. It's amazing what you'll accomplish if you'll just try to do something and then stand back and look at it. And at some point, you may be absolutely amazed at what you've been able to create. But if you never try, you'll never know. So
John and I have talked about this a lot. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
John and I have talked about this a lot. Scenery, although it does intimidate a lot of people, is one of the most forgiving and enjoyable aspects of this hobby that you could ever find. Cheryl and I have done, that's all we do when we go to conventions or division meetings or whatever, scenery clinics. And it's always been said by anybody we've been involved with, that they're the most popular clinics. Scenery clinics are the most popular clinics at a convention. And I think that really is partly because people are intimidated by it and they want to find out how to do it.
Yeah.
But over the years, we've discovered that it's if you don't like what's happening, you just tear it out and start over again. Especially with the styrofoam base that John's talking about now. It's so easy. You take a utility knife and you don't like your scenery in one spot or another. You just take a utility knife or an X-Acto knife or whatever, and you just hack it out and start over again. And it's a lot of fun. It's very enjoyable because it's relaxing and it's forgiving and it's a very enjoyable aspect of the hobby. It really is.
My
And
favorite.
there's nothing you can do that you can't instantly correct if it's wrong.
Exactly.
So listen, if there was one model railroader from the past or the present that you all have never met, who would that be? Who would you really want to sit down and have this kind of a conversation with?
You guys go first because I got a surprise on this one.
For me, it'd be John Allen.
All right, John Allen.
Thumbs
Lou?
up on that. Thumbs up for that one.
2 John Allen. Chuck?
Yeah, I have to go that way too.
3 John Allen. Okay, surprise us.
All right. Well, my thought is that's the obvious choice. So I wasn't going to pick the obvious choice. There's other obvious choices. We have here in town and just north of us in Dayton, Ohio, a very famous person in the hobby, Alan McClellan. And Alan McClellan is just phenomenal. He's probably the father of the good enough theory and a bunch of other things. He's just a legend. And he's still around, not doing well in health now, I understand. But he would be another one, but I've already met him and talked to him. In fact, he was the one, talk about another influencer. He was the one that encouraged me to put together the foam board clinic. And I did it once at a mini bunch meet, which is a local narrow gauge group here in the Ohio area. And so that was my first clinic I ever did in my life. And I was fresh out of college and I did that clinic and he encouraged me doing that. So there's another influencer. But so there's a lot of people like that I could mention. People could say Lynn Westcott or Malcolm Furlow or Kathy Malott from the UK or John Armstrong. I've met him though already. But I got a little twist here. So I'm actually gonna suggest, here's a person I'd like to meet. He's not technically a model railroader, or he wasn't, but if model railroads were around then, I bet he was. So let me see the slide there. All right, it's Leonardo da Vinci. Whoop, I have a blank in front of it. Do you have that? There we go.
We've got it.
I got it. Leonardo da Vinci. Now, what's interesting about him is he was an engineer, an architect, and an artist. Everything we've been talking about tonight, and everything that pretty much is what ticks me and what makes me tick. And so he was awesome. And not only was he an artist doing those nice Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, but he was also trying to figure things out. He had the human body thing, but he also invented things. He invented the first helicopter. It didn't really work and he didn't have the right motive power for it, but a nice try. And he invented on the bottom right is actually an airplane type flying apparatus. And then he invented the first tank. And that thing rolled around. He had exploded drawing of how this tank worked for a fighting vehicle. And then he loved geometry. He played around with geometric shapes. So, I mean, what's not to like about this guy? So it was awesome. So I think if model railroads were around, I mean, he would be a natural for it. He would have ate it up probably in all aspects of it. And I'd really like to ask him then, how did he come up with these inventions? What stimulated him? What did he see? A bird flying and he wanted to make a flying machine? I mean, how did he do that? And how did he translate it into an idea? So I'd love to ask him that. So that's my twist on this question.
Makes all the sense in the world to me. I think that's a great answer. Thank you.
All right.
And don't forget, John, don't forget he was Italian.
Yeah.
He was Italian. There you go. Did he make Italian food too? He must have,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Probably worked at Cleveland in a restaurant.
All right, guys, here's one for you. Where's the hobby of model railroader going today? Is it dying? Is it going to survive? Where are we?
I've got a lot of thoughts on this subject. I think my bottom line is I don't know if it's dying or growing, but I definitely know it's changing and adapting. It's definitely changing. A lot of things have happened today. And new technology with digital command control. Lou mentioned that a little bit. 3D printing, laser cutting. I mean, there's all these scratch building techniques now that you can just program on a computer and then have a machine make them for you. Basically, that changes the whole dynamics of model building, I think. You have to understand computerized CAD drawing to do all that stuff. It's a different technique. So I think things are changing, and I don't think it's as gloomy as some people think about the hobby. I mean, yes, there's a lot of old people in the hobby, but there's also a lot of young people. I see, especially in the rail fan community, which I see as a parallel, kind of a synergistic hobby, is rail fanning and model railroading, because most model railroaders are also rail fans. Not all, but most are. And some rail fans are also model railroaders. So I see a whole lot of young people out in the rail fan community. Mike and I go out, photograph trains. You see nothing but young people out there. I don't see hardly any old people, except occasionally at Station Inn, we see some older people. But usually we see young people, I mean, in their 20s, in their 30s, out there on the next to the tracks, photographing trains. And some of them we talk to are model railroaders as well. So I think the hobby's changing. I also went to that St. Louis RPM meet I mentioned. And at the RPM meets, I've noticed there are a lot of younger modelers. They have like 75, 100 tables of just nothing but display. People bring models and display them. It's really fascinating. And a lot of those modelers are very young. There were teenagers, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds. A lot of those people are young. You don't see that many younger people at NMRA conventions, although I hope we're seeing more lately, but you see them at these other alternative meets, I've noticed. So they are out there.
So let me ask you this. Why aren't they going to NMRAs?
Well, we've been told it's because that generation is not a generation that likes to have formal meetings. So they view the NMRA meetings as kind of formal. You go and you have a meet, you see a presentation, and then you go somewhere else. People are not joiners. They say they're not joiners. They like to be independents. Like the RPM meet, it kind of caters to independent people. They just come and have a good time that day and leave. But they don't have to join an organization. They don't have to be an officer. They don't have to volunteer for other stuff, whatever. We've been told that they're not joiners. They love the hobby, but they don't want to join. So they're kind of like lone wolf modelers that they engage when they want to.
Well, it'll be interesting in the future. Think this thing through with me a minute. The NMRA is dead because nobody wants to join it. So it dies. Well, if the NMRA dies, chances are all of these other associations like the O-scale Kings and S-scalers and all of that kind of order, that'll die too. So where do these people go at that point? I mean, they can still be rail fanning if they can find some place where they can see a train, or they can go maybe to an RPM meet if somebody or some group wants to take the risk of putting one on for them to go to. But doesn't that, if they're not going to join the organizations that are there now, how do you develop these new whatever they are, places for these people to go to.
What do you think, guys?
I think it's a lot of education to the model railroad, the lone wolf model railroader. He is enjoying, he's benefiting from the work that the NMRA has done since the 30s. He doesn't know it, all the things they did with the standards. And we know it. Members of the NMRA already know it. We just have to get that message out to them that their participation will keep that going for future modelers. And, you know, maybe some people don't care about where the hobby's going. They're just selfish.
Yeah.
I've gotten so much enjoyment from this hobby. I would like to see it go on, and I'm doing what I can to keep it going in my small way, and to encourage people to join the NMRA, because I think it's a very important aspect of the modeling, model railroading, for what it's done and what it will do in the future.
I agree. Mike, Lou?
I think the idea of joining the model railroad, the NMRA, I have a question about that. What has the NMRA done to change itself to accommodate the idea and the attitudes of the new people? And I don't think that question is going to be very easy to answer. When you think about it, the very program that we're on is part of what I'm trying to say. We could have clinics on how to create content about model railroading. And we could have young people that are interested in all of this electronic gizmos that they now have. And what the NMRA did for model railroading, as far as their standards and their methods and their blue books, that needs to be refreshed. That needs to be updated with today's world in mind. And I think people would have an interest in that. If we could present to them an idea of a model railroad that had all of the bells and whistles of creating internet content or YouTube content, I guarantee you we would have a lot of interest in that. Maybe a clinic on how to create Zoom meetings. John, you have gone through all of the pain and suffering of getting that working. We have an opportunity to share it with people. And, you know, maybe the NMRA would be a good vehicle to get that going. I think one of the other aspects that, for me, I joined the NMRA because I liked the idea of having the standards. You know, the idea of the horn hook coupler. And I hate horn hook couplers, but the NMRA is what got those standards on all of the different rolling stock, so people could play nice together.
It's true.
And you know, I think we have the same problem today that we had back then. It's just on a completely different stage. The young people today are on a completely different platform than what the NMRA was back when we all joined. And if we don't address that change and freshen up our ideas, freshen up, you know, maybe incorporate some of these new procedures and new standards and so forth, and put it out in front of people.
I can tell you some of that's already happened. You know, our Gordy Robinson, our new president, he's a fairly young guy. He's part of these generations, and he's got a big following among the younger members. And in fact, that's how he got elected, I believe. And he's
agree with
done something. He's done something that all the other officers had just talked about it for a decade or more, and that's he got the electronic NMRA magazine. He got it done nicely electronically. The way they're paying for it is a little controversial with some people, but at least he's got it, and he got it to everybody. So, and that's something that was never done. It was said that the technology wasn't there, we couldn't do it, whatever. And that's one of the first things he did after he became president. So he ran on that platform to do that. And I think the younger people, that's what they want, is electronic. I personally don't care about electronic newsletter because I like to read the hard copy. I just like that. I'm old school, but I don't mind it going to everybody else if it gets more members and gets more activity going. So that's an example. I mean, things are changing. I think that's changing. But what about you, Chuck? Did you have anything to say?
Yeah, I wanted to add that to what I said before. I belong to the NMRA up in Cleveland. Never went to a meeting at Division 4 or 5. I was intimidated because I didn't know that much. I wasn't. My skills weren't up to it, and I just thought I would embarrass myself. Well, when I came down here to Cincinnati, other than my children who were down here, I knew no one. So I said, I'm going to go to a meeting. And it was the best thing I ever did, really. You and Randy Kirka greeted me and made me feel comfortable. And it just took off from there. I think when I'm working the membership booth at our fall show, I can tell that some people exude that intimidation when I try to get them to come to a meeting as a guest. And I try to tell them my story, that you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be that much or that much experience. You will, if you want to learn and become better, come to a meeting. You'll enjoy it and join the NMRA. And I've gotten a few people to join that way, and they're happy about it. So,
Chuck, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I think the NMRA is intimidating to a lot of people. I think they look at an NMRA member as a very talented model railroader. And if they don't feel that they can measure up to that, they're scared to death to put themselves forward. I hear it from people all the time. That's why I've had people tell me, if I go to a clinic and I have a question for the person giving the clinic, I won't ask the question. Why? I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't feel comfortable asking a question and running the risk of sounding dumb or stupid. So I just won't ask the question. And I think that's a serious problem.
if you knew all
That's a
the,
shame.
That's a
There's
shame.
something to what you just said that kind of clicks for me. I would wonder what the percentage of people with degrees in things like engineering and electronics and, people that have, well, I don't want to make this sound like it probably is going to sound, but model railroaders are mostly nerds. All of us are for the most part nerds. I mean, John, you're
I was a huge nerd in high school. I didn't know it, but I was.
I didn't outgrow it.
And,
I didn't care either.
Honestly, I don't think nerds are the kind of people that really attract a lot of people as far as joiners. And you guys ever watch The Big Bang Theory?
Oh yeah, that's me.
Okay.
Sheldon.
Well, yeah, you're Sheldon. I know that. But the thing I'm trying to say is, what's Sheldon's hobby?
Model railroad.
Railroading.
Model railroading. And I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think there is an awful lot of intelligent people in this hobby, and people that come to our meetings are intimidated because of that. And I feel that that's a problem we can address.
I've never thought of it that way. You have an excellent point. What do you think, Lou? And then we got to close this out.
Well, I've been listening to all this, and I'll tell you a little story about myself. I joined the NMRA back in probably the late 70s. And one thing they might want to think about today is to go back to the old, I joined a division. At the time, I didn't have a lot of excess cash laying around. So, and I met a couple of fellows that I actually knew them from just after we graduated from high school. And when I got out of college, met one of them somewhere. I don't remember where, but we got talking about model railroading and how we could get together and learn something. And he said, join a division of the NMRA. And for, I don't know, $6, I could join a division. I didn't have to join the national. I didn't have to join the regional. And I joined the division. And we started going to I guess there were monthly meetings, the round robin type of thing, going to some of the more advanced modelers would have us at their home, and we would go and we'd just interact with each other. And eventually it developed into, I joined the regional, and then I joined the national. Maybe starting going back to that kind of an approach, having some of these young people join a division first. And the other thing that I want to make a point of is you're talking about being intimidated. That's on the shoulders of the presenter. I was upset with a fellow at a NMRA regional convention just about a year ago. He was talking about, I won't even get into the subject or the individual that was involved. I asked him an honest question about a subject he was talking about, and he immediately he made an attempt to belittle me. My question wasn't something that was even worth answering.
Wow.
It really upset me. I'm like, now if I was a newcomer to the hobby and I walked in there and I asked him that same question, which I knew was a legitimate question, to have that negative response just turned me right off. And I can imagine what it would have done to someone new to the hobby. So the presenters, the people who are giving the clinics and the people who are involved have to treat these people with respect, just as they want respect in return. Another thing that the NMRA might want to look at is national narrow gauge conventions, because I know there's a number of people in the NMRA conventions now, but it looks to me like these last few these narrow gauge conventions I've been attending, their attendance has been growing as far as I know. It's a more informal type of a get together. There's less of this. There's less monetary investment because they don't have bus trips. We just talked about it before this started this evening, that the people drive around to different layouts in their own vehicles. There's less money involved in having bus trips. There's, they get to see these individual layouts, and the layouts, whether an NMRA or narrow gauge, you're going to see the best of the best when you're at these things, because you're going to see good layouts. But they might want to take a look at what the National Narrow Gauge is doing, because I know I've been to a number of their conventions and they're impressive. They don't have, in the morning they have clinics. We discussed this earlier too. In the morning they have their clinics. In the middle of the day they do their layout tours. In the evening they have clinics. Nothing is interrupting something else or competing with something else. There's a specific subject that's covered at a specific time of day. That may be something that the NMRA people want to look at. That maybe you've got to change the format of your meetings, at least let's say on a national level. In the NMRA national meetings or the regional meetings, pretty much the same thing. But I think in regional, do they have you've done regional, John? So do they actually have bus trips, or can people go around in their cars to see layouts?
We had both.
Right. So that gives people the opportunity to do it in their automobiles.
Yeah, because we had so many things to offer And we had both. I mean, there are conventions now that don't even have any general interest tours of any kind. They just ignore the ladies anymore, which is a big mistake in my
I
opinion.
think so, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
So
Well, listen, I hate to do this because this is fascinating discussion, but we're almost 3 hours into this, gentlemen.
right.
So guys, I got to bring this to an end. So let me ask the three friends, Mike and Lou and Shay. You have any final thing that you'd like to say to John before we end this? Mike, what about you?
Well, I think I've told John on a personal level enough. I think he pretty much knows how I feel about things and about him. And I've always said he's the brother I never had. So that's it.
Well, I appreciate you being here so much tonight, Mike. Thank you.
You're
Lou,
welcome.
what about you?
Well, I'll probably cut to the chase too. I think knowing John these many years, I think he's a really driven individual. Cheryl and I met him 25 years ago when we photographed the Eastern Loggers. And 4 years ago, as you mentioned earlier, we reshot that same railroad, and that doesn't happen too often. And his fellow Eastern Loggers have him and Mike to thank for that. Because I can count on one hand the layouts we photographed that have ended up on public display or in a museum, and the Eastern Loggers is definitely one of them. And when John sets his mind to do something, it gets done. And as I said before, we first met John and Ruth Ann over 2.5 decades ago. We watched as two boys grow up and have families of their own. We get together whenever we can with him and the boys and Ruth Ann, and we really enjoy those visits. The logging layout is gone, but we're looking forward very much to see what John does in the future on his own railroad in that very, very empty basement of his.
Chuck, how about you?
Well, I'll sum it up like this. When I grow up, I want to be just like John. Okay. Like I said earlier, he's been an inspiration to me to get involved, to volunteer, and do what I can to help give back to the organization that has given me much. And I really appreciate all the mentoring and advice he has given me over the years, and he better not stop.
I won't. You know that.
Well,
That's
gentlemen, thank all three of you for being here this evening. I really do appreciate it. You've added so much to our show, and you've been very gracious with your time. So thank you. And John, since we're almost finished here, I will give you the last word, sir.
Sure, I will. And I want to first thank everybody here tonight. Everybody was most gracious and generous. And it's a joy to work with all of you. And I want to thank the whole production team here tonight too, as well. And you, Jim, for spearheading all of this. I think it's hopefully people get something out of it for the hobby, and it'll help everybody. I would say something to the people that are listening, to the listening audience. I would tell everybody, whether you're new or inexperienced or experienced modeler, it doesn't matter. I encourage you all to go for it. You know, exercise your intellectual curiosity and your creativity. We've been talking a lot tonight, and to figure out how things work and make them better, or just to make a great scene or whatever you want to build. You know, it's really up to you. It's the beauty of this hobby. You build whatever you want to build, and you pick your themes and you go with it, and you have fun, like we mentioned tonight, often fun. And along the way, be sure to volunteer. I wanted to say one thing related to our previous subject about the money in the hobby. A lot of people say the hobby is too expensive. And it is true. If you try to buy everything brand new, the latest technology, I mean, locomotives are hundreds of dollars at HO scale right now. If you want the highest detail, sound system, everything, engine. But as Mike and I have found, there's a plethora of high quality used locomotives. You go to any flea market, any show, any eBay, you can find high quality locomotives for very reasonable prices. And I would recommend any beginner to start there. Don't buy the most expensive thing you can put your hands on. Buy stuff that's practical, and there's still great detail and all the other stuff. I mean, it's really good. So I would recommend you do that. And the other thing I'd recommend you do is make sure you volunteer. Get involved and volunteer, because remember, if you volunteer, it helps not only the person you're helping, but it helps you and it helps the whole hobby. So it's a win-win-win. Make sure you do that. It's really good. Get involved. Don't do it by yourself. We mentioned that tonight. Don't do it by yourself. Please join, seek out your local modelers, whether they're in the NMRA or some club or a modeling group or whatever it is. Try to get involved in the hobby, and then ultimately get to the NMRA if you can. I'd really recommend you do that. So it's a wonderful lifetime hobby. It is the world's greatest hobby, and I'd recommend you get involved and have fun.
Well, John, I want to thank you so much for being here this evening and giving us the amount of time that you have. It's really been my honor to be with you tonight, and to meet the three friends that joined us. You obviously have made a tremendous contribution and continue to make outstanding contributions to model railroading and to model building in our hobby. You obviously have also made some fantastic friends that all of us would be fortunate to call friends. So thank you all for being here this evening and sharing your ideas and thoughts about the hobby, and hopefully getting more people interested in the hobby, and certainly feel now that they have met John Buchner and know a little bit about who he is and what he's all about. If that has happened, then we've accomplished what this program was hoping to accomplish tonight. So thanks again, John, and thank you for the time that you spent with us tonight.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, that's it for this evening. I want to thank all of our viewers. I hope that you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel, New Tracks Modeling, and ring the bell so that you'll get notices of all of our future shows and be able to join us live as you have hopefully tonight, and be able to meet and talk with the future guests like you have with John. Also, I hope you'll subscribe to our website, newtracksmodeling.com. And be able to get the login links for our Zoom shows that happen every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. They're a different type of show because you'll meet a lot of different kind of modelers who will show you exactly how they build and what they do and the techniques that they use. So I hope you'll join us for those shows. So thank you so much again for appearing with us this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Most importantly, I hope you've learned something, and I hope that you continue to be involved with model railroading. Thank you, and until next time.